Okay, it's time to get started. We welcome you to the Southeastern Regional Advisory Council meeting. This meeting is being held in person at the John Wesley Powell Museum, as well as being streamed live on YouTube. This public forum allows you to express your opinions, ideas on wildlife management in our state. The RAC considers your feedback on the proposals before us today and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RACs, are in charge of setting wildlife policy for the state. Wildlife management is complex and sometimes it's emotionally charged. We all have ideas and opinions about what's best for Utah's wildlife. That's why we're here today, and that's a good thing. We encourage those who want to express their opinion today at today's meeting to fill out a comment card. The cards are back on the table back there. If you'll fill out those cards, put the agenda item in which you wish to talk and bring that up to one of the ends of the tables. We would appreciate that. Disrespectful behavior, including booing, yelling, cheering, laughing while someone's speaking, will not be tolerated. You can also help maintain respectful space by referring to people by name instead of descriptors of their physical characteristics, demeanor, or gender. If this behavior occurs, the RAC Chair will remind attendees to be respectful. If it continues, those individuals will be asked to leave. And lastly, to help reduce distractions, we ask that you put your phone on silent. If you do need to take a call, please step outside to do that. We recognize a few people here today, our director, a lot of division personnel, board members. So we appreciate all those who are here and make these meetings happen. We do have a hard time limit that the owners of the building have asked us to be out of here by. So with that, we're going to ask you to keep your comments and questions as short and concise as possible. Once the process will go through, we'll have the presenters come up, give any clarifications that they might need to pass on. We'll have questions from the RAC members. Then we'll have questions from the audience. We'll have Chris summarize the public comments. Then we'll take comments from the audience. If you filled out the cards, then we'll go back to RAC discussion and open it up for motions for each agenda item. So if you come up to give comments, we'll keep it to 3 minutes for people representing themselves. If you're representing a group, we'll give you 5 minutes. Because we're on such a short timeline, as your time is running up, I'll hold up my hands indicating you have 10 seconds left. Please wrap it up as quickly as possible so that we can make sure that we get out of here in time. With that, let's quickly introduce our RAC members. Start with Kirk down there.
Kirk Player, representing Sportsman.
Stephen Duke, representing At Large.
Dana Truman, representing BLM.
Darren Olson, representing the Forest Service.
Cash Stallings, representing Public at Large.
Eric Luke, Sportsman's rep.
Tyler Gilson, representing Public.
Charles Fisher, Sportsman's rep.
Sunshine Bersey, non-consumptive.
Brad Richmond, non-consumptive.
And at this time, we don't have any other RAC members who are online. So with that, I'll open it up for a motion to approve the agenda in the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda in the minutes.
Second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. It's been seconded. Motion by Charles, seconded by Brad. All those in favor indicate. That passes unanimously. All right, I'm going to give a quick update from the last board meeting. I'll try and make this as quick as possible. This board meeting was dealing with fishing regulations. There was a motion made to ask the division to study the possibilities of increased opportunities for spear fishing and look at the impact that spear fishing on fisheries in Utah may have, and to place that on the action log. That passed unanimously. The next motion passed 3-2. That motion was to accept the division's proposal regarding ice hole size, but ask the division to monitor the use of ice holes and the size of holes being used and report back in 1 year. The next motion was to accept the proposal on Manning Meadow and Barney reservoirs and to reevaluate the reservoirs in 2 years. That passed unanimously. The next motion was to accept the balance of the division's recommendations as presented, and that passed unanimously. Concerning Rule R657-61, the amendments, it was unanimously passed as presented by the division. And there were motions made concerning the conservation permit audit, conservation permit annual report, the expo permit audit, and the expo permit allocations. Those all passed unanimously. With that, because of our time constraint, Chris has decided to forego the regional update to give us a little more time. We want to make sure that we have plenty of time for good RAC discussion, questions, and comments from the audience. We also have an important issue as our last agenda item that we don't want to just push through and rubber stamp at the end. So with that, brings us to our first action item. Dax, ask you to take the hot seat. Any clarifications you'd like to make before we open it up to questions?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Dax Mangus, Big Game Coordinator. Happy to be with you tonight. I did have one correction. So in the committee, we talked about buck to doe ratios on our premium limited entry units. And in the conversations in the committee, that changed a little bit over time through the committee process. And so it's correct in the memo and in the PowerPoint presentation that was on our website, but in the actual plan document, when it shows the objective for premium limited entry units, it is listed in the plan document that I sent to you as 35 to 40, and it's actually the recommendation is 40 to 45 being the postseason buck to doe ratio for premium limited entry units. So sorry about the oversight there. We had changed it at one point and then changed it again, and I didn't update it that final time before we sent it out. Other than that, happy to be here. Lots of questions last night and in some of the other RACs, and happy to answer any questions, provide any clarification to facilitate a good discussion tonight.
Okay, thanks, Dax. With that, we'll open it up to questions from the RAC.
Okay, I'll ask one. When we redid the statewide elk plan, and because of the restructuring there was going to be an increase in bull elk permits across many of our units. With the restructuring of the mule deer plan, some of our units that have been at a higher buck to doe ratio are going to be lowered, which will lead to an increase in permits. Has there been any discussion or thought on staging out that increase over a 2 or 3 year period, or is the plan to kind of dump that all on this first year go around?
So, at this point, we're not making permanent number recommendations. We'd be doing that in the spring. We've been trying to manage to our buck-to-doe ratios, on an annual basis. Deer are a shorter-lived species as compared to elk, and especially when you're looking at general season deer versus limited entry elk, you're really comparing apples and oranges there. At the same time, we're sensitive if something looks like a gigantic increase. Maybe you'll remember last year, we've kind of gotten behind ourselves on permit numbers in southern Utah, and we get a lot of social pushback from that part of the state as well. So we recommended phasing it in just because some of those changes were larger than a lot of folks were comfortable with. So I can't tell you for sure, we're going to have to look at the numbers when it comes to this spring. If there are some that are gigantic changes, I think we would consider phasing them in rather than going whole hog. And with deer, you kind of need to, enjoy the resource when it's available. Deer populations, we have good spells when they do well, and we have bad spells when they don't do as well. And you can't save bucks forever. So if we can sustainably enjoy a surplus, we want to do that, especially on general deer units.
So thank you for that. One other question I have for you is it was kind of clear from your presentation that some of the units across the state that are remaining in that 18 to 20 range seem to have a large amount of private land on them. I've heard you discuss why we've made those decisions. I was just wondering if during those discussions about units that have enough private land to probably cross over into a higher buck-to-doe ratio, if our San Juan Abajo unit came up in that conversation. It's a big unit. There's a lot of canyon country though, and it kind of feels like a lot of the good deer habitat is private land. We have a lot of CWMUs in that area. So I was wondering if that one was even brought up in the discussion about dropping it down or raising or keeping it where it's at.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, is Scoot with us tonight online?
Unfortunately, yeah.
And Scoot was on our committee. He would maybe remember that one better than me. It's been a few months. I know that's one that when we did discuss it to some degree. And one of the things we talked about was up until just a few years ago, that unit had been managed at that 15 to 17 ratio for quite a few years. And then we had changed it to 18 to 20. And one of the conversations we had with Scoot from this region on the committee was he talked about at one point in time, and him and some of his friends that he hunted with really felt like that was going to be a great thing and make a big difference. He said the only difference it really made was that he couldn't draw a tag every year anymore. And he said, looking back on it, I wish we hadn't have changed it. I wish we would have kept it at 15 to 17. So that was probably the extent of the conversation with regard to the Bajo unit.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Charles?
Yeah, I got a question. Oh, well, I got two questions, but one on the habitat management objectives and strategies. Number two is requesting additional mitigation for disturbance to deer habitats. What does that look like, as a lot of vegetation projects are considered disturbance towards mule deer habitat while they're taking place?
Yeah, so, and this is a strategy that we implemented in the statewide elk plan revision a couple of years back, where if we're going to have, some type of a project that disturbs habitat, it's pretty typical, pretty normal, especially, working through NEPA process and working with partners at federal land management agencies to request, or on our divisional lands to request some type of a mitigation to offset impacts or disturbance to those habitats. And we put that in the elk plan. We're requesting a 4-to-1 mitigation ratio, meaning, if they disturb 1 acre of habitat, we would ask them to do good things for that species on 4 acres of habitat. And we've had good luck. It is voluntary, it's not mandatory, but that's what we will request. And we've had good luck getting compliance and cooperation from folks that were involved in development projects that impacted elk habitat with that change in the elk plan. And based on feedback from our habitat section staff, they felt like it was an effective measure to have in that elk plan. And we wanted to try to implement the same thing in this deer plan to try to do as much as we can to offset, or maybe even get a little improvement when we do have things that are inevitably going to happen that disturb deer habitat. So, does that answer your question? Or you want to know the specifics, mechanics? We might need to have one of the habitat section staff come up if we want to dive into specifics.
I'm just wondering if that is going to affect agencies as like the DWR doing things like mastication and stuff like that, that we've seen that improves deer habitat, but might be a temporary disturbance. If that's going to be nixed because of the plan.
That's not the intent. It's not, you know, there's a difference between probably a longer term disturbance versus we're going to have a bull hog in somewhere for 2 weeks type of disturbance.
Okay, great, thanks. And then my next question is on the new CWMU. I mean, sorry, not CWMU. The oh gosh, what am I looking for? The CWD units. Thank you. So many acronyms. I could probably.
Hey, we're the state, the feds. You guys are next level with acronyms, so we're kind of medium level. Yeah. Okay.
First off, I'm glad to see some new stuff coming out from the DWR on that. I just want to know how you determined to draw those units, especially those ones around Castle Valley and Moab, and where you decided to draw those boundaries and why.
And maybe I'll give some time to the region to talk specifics of the boundaries, if that's okay, you guys. And is that kind of question then, just the boundaries? Maybe we'll have Dustin or Ian from the region come up and give us a little rundown on kind of why they chose those.
Make sure this one's on this time. Yeah, thank you. So I did kind of want to preface this. I kind of knew this was going to come up. So since 2021, like within the town boundaries of Moab and Castle Valley, we've submitted 37 samples from deer we get called about either roadkill or dead in people's yards. And of those 37, all 37 came back positive for CWD. That was kind of why this came up, was more of a concern. We're starting to see positives on the mountain, kind of around Moab and Castle Valley itself. So we drew the boundaries, within kind of that winter range where we suspected we've had callers come the mountain down into town. We drew those boundaries kind of around those callers to mitigate some of that spread from, our hotspot town areas up the mountain.
Okay, thanks. I mean, that's concerning to hear that 37 came back positive, 37 that were found deceased. And then you're just using the collar data to kind of determine where they're coming and staying.
Yeah, right. So we did a collar study specifically on the deer in Moab. We put out 15 or so collars last year. And I think 10 have died, and most of them came back positive for CWD. But those were, resident town deer, but we've had this like kind of long running survival study on the LaSalle's where we've got migratory deer that are coming, Castle Valley and that lower end of Pat Creek are both major winter range where we see a lot of overlap between those kind of resident deer and our migratory deer. So that we drew the boundaries determined by that.
Okay, and then you're seeing them come in during those season dates so that hunters can actually harvest those deer.
Yeah, right. Okay. So the thought behind that was, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but yeah, the thought behind that was like right now, our best understanding of like how to mitigate, once CWD is in a population, you can't get rid of it, right? It's in the population, but what we can do is try to mitigate some of that spread. And during the dates of that hunt is when we see those mature bucks coming down into town for the rut, and then head back on the mountain for summer range. So that's why we set those seasons dates there. It's because that's when we're actually seeing the interaction between our migratory deer and our resident deer.
Ian, before you sit down, I got a question regarding that.
Yeah, absolutely.
With the strategy, these are obviously buck hunts that you have, but
yeah,
do you have plans? Is there doe hunts that happen? I mean, as bad as we hate to see doe hunts happen, but in a case like this, is that something that maybe even early doe hunts to target the does that are living in those areas?
Yeah, right. And so like outside of the rut, like you're saying, like during these early hunts, it would be kind of a targeted effort within city limits. And that brings up a whole nother can of worms. So yeah, right now the strategy was to try and target some of that spread up the mountain for the time being. Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I mean, we've been talking about CWD for 20 years on the LaSalle's. It's the highest prevalence. So we wanted to try something, and this made the most sense for right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why do you think there's such a high prevalence in, I mean, the LaSalle's you just spoke about being that way for a long time now, but it seems like down in town, it's higher than in the wild,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah. So like why the prevalence is so much higher in town. That's a good question. So I think a lot of it is you got a lot of deer packed into such a relatively small area, right? And they don't leave. So CWD is spread not only through nose-to-nose contact, which it's, you know, when you've got a lot of deer packed into a tight area, it kind of runs rampant, but also there's an environmental factor because it's not like a living organism, you know, it doesn't die. So you get a lot of deer packed into one area that don't leave. It just kind of runs rampant in a population like that. But like when you said you've got migratory deer interacting with those residence deer, that's when you kind of start to see it spread out of those hotspot areas. And that's really what we're trying to target here. Trying something, yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Dax?
Thank you, guys.
I have one more.
I was just going to mention real quickly. So, I mean, really in the plan, in the CWU appendix portion of the plan is not actually the place where we call for these hunts, but it opens the door and says, hey, this is the type of management actions we're going to take. And this is a little bit of a tricky thing with this deer plan because the deer plan revision kind of led to the next agenda item, which are the research proposals, and the next agenda item, which are the, you know, the season dates, and then another couple agenda items down where Lindy talks about stuff. So there's some overlap and some tangential things here, and we'll just try to work through that the best we can when we were trying to decide how to present it, in what order, and which things to keep in which agenda item. It was a little bit of a what comes first, chicken or the egg type thing here. So yeah, that we're not technically probably voting specifically on the dates and those boundaries in this agenda item. Just want to make that clear, but we're happy to answer the questions and facilitate the discussion best we can, but it's a little messy because there's a lot of overlap.
Thanks, Dax. So my question that I'd have for you here is, throughout this committee process where we had representation from all across the state, including within our regions, was there a recommitment at all from the regions to follow the statewide elk plan? I mean, sorry, deer plan? Because I'm gonna be honest with you, I get really frustrated that we make these plans, we go through all this process to try to come up what's best for the state. And then region by region, we get to pick and choose which of those rules in the plan we want to follow. And I beg the question, like, well, then let's just do region plans. I don't understand why we're doing a statewide plan. So was there a recommitment from this group to, hey, we're going to work on this plan together and then we're going to follow it together? Was there any conversation about that?
Absolutely. Yes. That's a great question and a great point. And it is, you know, some of the changes that are incorporated in this plan represent those discussions and some of those, frankly, some of those frustrations that we've had sometimes. In the past, buck to doe ratios were set in unit plans. And now we're proposing setting the buck to doe ratios in the statewide plan. I know people feel like, you know, maybe I ought to have a little more say in the unit I live closest to. But when we start looking at the data, there's a whole lot of people who maybe have family who still live in Blanding or Monticello, but now they live in Utah County, but they come back home and hunt in Blanding or Monticello every year. And it's really hard to weigh super heavily, you know, just local voices on some of these things because it's really a statewide resource. So that is one of the changes we made in the plan. One of the other changes you might have seen in the plan was the ability for the division to make some adjustments to permit numbers based on the data. Like if we want to fight about what buck to doe ratio we're going to manage to, let's do that now while we set those goals, while we set those targets. If we want to manage to higher or lower buck to doe ratios, let's make that decision now, but then let's actually manage to what we've agreed to manage to. And that's been a hard one for the division sometimes, where we agree we're going to manage a certain way, and then we have to come back and ask for permission every single year to manage that way. And then we get told no, and we end up further and further out of compliance with what we agreed to do in the plan. And it can cause some issues sometimes. So yeah, there was good consensus from this committee to say, yeah, let's look at this. It's a statewide resource. Let's commit to doing this and doing it right. And let's put some tools and some mechanisms in the plan that will help us to be more consistent and keep us honest and keep us following what we've agreed to follow.
That's kind of a follow-up to that. I know one of the hot topics, particularly last night, was the 30% adjustments that's in the new plan. When the RACs and boards don't change the division's recommendations, how often do those recommendations come in right where they're intended to come in?
You know, I guess I'm going to toot our own horn just a little bit here. When we have great data sets, we have better data available to us than we've ever had before in the history of the Division of Wildlife. And we've been doing it a few years. We're taking a lot of things into consideration. When we develop our recommendations based on, factoring in all those pieces of data that we have in the plan to continue to use and do, we've pretty much hit right where we anticipated we would hit every time that the recommendations we've asked for have been approved the way we've asked for them. So I think we have a pretty strong track record. That doesn't mean that we have a crystal ball or we always know exactly how things are going to turn out. And natural systems will throw you a curveball once in a while, and we can make adjustments if that does happen. But we have a pretty good track record. 90+% of the time when we get the recommendations we ask for with permit numbers, we come in right where we figure we're going to come in for buck-to-doe ratios. We've been doing it that way for, I think, 3 or 4 years now.
Kirk, you look like you have a question. No, I'm done. Thanks, Zach.
On the coyote bounty, was there any discussion on maybe changing that program to something that's more targeted geographically and on the calendar to when it matters? Like, are we wasting money there that could be better used somewhere else?
Yeah, I love that question. And I'm gonna spoil one of Darren's agenda items for next RAC tour just a tiny bit. Sorry to steal Darren's thunder. Yes, that's definitely been a conversation we've had in the committee and also internally within the division. We made some revisions, some changes to our predator management policy, and the Mule Deer Protection Act is a piece of legislation that was enacted by the state legislature that created the bounty program. And the way that was created, it's pretty much statewide. If you're enrolled in that program, you harvest a coyote, you can turn it in and get a $50 bounty. We do want to try to maximize the benefit to mule deer from predator control, specifically with coyotes. And so we are going to be proposing, Darren will bring it around next round of RACs, a higher payment, a higher bounty for coyotes that are removed from targeted areas from crucial mule deer habitats. So yes. Sorry, Darren, if I stole your thunder.
No, that's perfect. And I'm glad to hear that. One other thing, did it come up? And I know this gets real messy because you have to work with the land management agencies, but did it ever come up? And maybe this goes more in the technology, but to limit access, we're talking about hunting differently, right? To be able to hunt more and grow more too. So did that ever come up? I know there's been some proposals from like the Forest Service and other agencies in the past that haven't really been well received, but have like a hunting season, that road's closed. So you can go and get them, but you've got to work a little bit more to do it.
Yeah, we really didn't dive into that super deep. We had conversations of, we want to make sure we make comments on travel management plans or proposals especially on federal lands, with regard to how we can manage travel and motorized access to provide the most benefit to mule deer. And roads are sensitive, talk to some of your county commissioners down here or something about closing roads. And that's a sensitive issue and one that we're aware of and we're sensitive to that. We want to try to work within existing frameworks and work with our partners at the county level and local levels and federal land management agencies to do the right thing with roads. But it's pretty hard to put blanket statements in there saying, like we are in favor of closing roads to benefit mule deer. I don't think we're willing to go that far with it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Any other questions for Dax? Tyler?
So the push for the changes statewide for the buck to doe ratio is coming from the data that's been collected, the GPS collar data over the last several years or decade, that shows higher productivity in the population. What does productivity mean?
Yeah, so I love great question. And that's something they asked me about it last night in the Southern Region RAC, and I hadn't really crunched the numbers or looked at it as hard as I perhaps should have. I still haven't done a full-on analysis where you could take the slope of our line where we have graphed lambda and apply that to our deer population in Utah. I still haven't had time to sit down and look at something like that, but I did look at a study done by Dr. Chad Bishop in Colorado a few years back, where they changed their buck to doe ratio and looked at what it did to fawn to doe ratios. And the results we saw with our analysis looked similar to what Bishop saw in that paper that he published and it was, I think it was like one for every buck you reduce in your buck to doe ratio, the fawn to doe ratio went up about 1.7 fawns. So, you gain almost 2 fawns for every buck you give up. Those aren't huge numbers. And I do want to be clear, the data does seem to indicate there's some correlation there. It's been observed and documented in Colorado and also in Utah. We saw fatter does on units with lower buck to doe ratios, which translates into higher survival and productivity. And it's probably not a silver bullet that solves everything. It's not like if we lower all of the buck to doe ratios in Utah to 8 bucks per 100 does, our deer population is going to double in the next 2 years. But when we factored in disease resilience, increased productivity, and more opportunity for folks to get out and hunt, all those things combined was pretty compelling to this committee and motivating to them to want to make some adjustments there. So, but that's what they observed on that study in Colorado, was about 1.7 additional fawns for every buck per 100 doe that the ratio went down. Their fawn to doe ratio went up by 1.7 for every buck it went down.
Was their data was it retrospective as well, or were they looking for that particular outcome?
So they did actually change their buck to doe ratio and then observed that.
So our data in Utah, I think I heard you say it was observational. Is that correct? So you pulled all the data and then you start looking at points, and so it's technically a correlation where there's some sort of association there. Doesn't necessarily show cause and effect, but something's going on there.
There's a pretty strong, pretty compelling correlation, and it is observational data. We haven't experimentally manipulated buck to doe ratios. So, but they did experimentally manipulate the buck to doe ratios in Colorado, but our observational data set showed the same result. And we talked about trying that in Utah. In the committee, we actually talked quite a bit about maybe choosing a handful of units and trying to manage them for, a quite a bit lower buck to doe ratio. And to be totally honest, we just couldn't get consensus from the committee. Everyone thought it was a great idea as long as it was tested somewhere they didn't like to hunt.
Is there enough of a difference between the 15 to 17 bucks per 100 does versus the 18 per 20 to evaluate that?
It may be a little trickier to determine trend there. And one of the other things you have to keep in mind, if you have really good conditions, you can grow deer even if you have a really high buck to doe ratio. It's when you have kind of average to poor conditions is when it seems to manifest itself more. Weather's the largest driver by far. If you have great weather conditions, you don't have to be a very good biologist to grow deer if you have good weather conditions. If you have poor weather conditions, it kind of seems like no matter how good of a biologist you're going to lose some deer. No matter how good of a biologist you're going to lose some deer. So, but when we sat back and looked at things, you know, since the early 80s till now, we've done nothing but cut permits, and our deer populations have ebbed and flowed based on weather patterns with probably a long-term slightly downward trend. So we could try more of the same, or maybe we could try something different. And we had Dr. McMillan and Dr. Larson that work with the slot on research, and they crunched a lot of these numbers, and in the committee meetings they said, hey, you know, for part of this research proposal, we're proposing trying some things here, and some of the things, there's actually a lot of data that indicates they don't work, but the data indicates this one might work. If we're going to try something, we ought to try the one where the data says it might actually work. And still, we couldn't get a lot of committee buy-in to do anything really extreme. It'll be a little harder to tease it out with the smaller changes in buck to doe ratios. But if we take some of those units that are supposed to be at 18 to 20, but they're always at 23 or 24, and actually manage them to 15 to 17, maybe it is a little bigger change. Sorry, that's a rambling answer. I've talked too much at these. No wonder these meetings go so late. That's my fault.
It seems like weather plays such a large role and would be such a big confounder. How do you tease that data out going forward?
Yeah, and that's why a lot of times 2 or 3 years might not be long enough to really evaluate things. And you know, the longer of a data set you have, and the more you can look at all these different extremes of weather patterns we have, is going to give you a better idea and a better picture of what's going on. And you're right. I mean, we look at the winter of 22, 23, and then you look at the drought years we had, you know, 3 to 5 years before that. It is really hard when we have big extreme changes in weather. It's harder to detect long-term patterns. You detect these patterns, you really got to look at it over a longer time scale, probably, to tease some of these things out.
So would you say with the recommendations, we're kind of moving into this experimental phase to see if this really stands true? A lower buck to doe ratio increases herd productivity.
I mean, that's definitely something we're going to keep an eye on, and I hope it provides benefits in the realm of increased productivity, increased participation in deer hunting, and also hopefully helping with disease resilience. So yeah, with a combination of those things, we felt like it was a good direction to move in, and hopefully it helps.
Any more questions for Dax?
I guess I have one question. I noticed that the new plan says to support mule deer research studies investigating the use of restricted weapons and antler point reductions. Does it support any other studies, or are those the only studies that the plan would support? And can you talk a little bit on why those are called out?
I think those ones are called out specifically because we're also recommending studies in along that vein right now, and perhaps the language there is too specific. I think we're open to, you know, if there are other compelling strategies that could help us accomplish our goals of, you know, managing to our population objectives, we would also be interested in researching those.
Those two specific, and we'll talk about those in the next agenda item, but those were the two that the committee actually settled on.
And I hope the way that's worded doesn't close the door to where those are the only things we can investigate. The idea and our hope would be, like I said, if there are other compelling treatments or things we could do, we would be happy to investigate or research those as well. And we intend to continue with our long-term deer survival and cause-specific mortality, habitat use, migration timing, you know, all that research that we're doing now with the GPS collars. It's our intent to continue with that research and monitoring as well.
Well, that's good to hear.
Steve, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just curious if you could clarify a little bit. Pine Valley, What was it about their unit that made you make a decision to keep that ratio there versus, I got a lot of people in San Juan County that are begging me to, you understand, but
Yeah,
what was it about Pine Valley that had a compelling argument to keep it the same?
we probably get 10-to-1 comments about the Pine Valley unit versus any other unit in the state. I mean, it really boils down to that. Like for every comment about this unit or that unit, we probably get 10 comments about the Pine Valley unit.
So that means we need to increase our comments.
Whine louder.
I just want
No.
to clarify that.
Yeah. Squeaky wheel. Be a squeaky wheel if you want to get the grease. I don't know. And I grew up on the Pine Valley. I killed my first buck on Utah Hill. So I'm from there originally. So I'm probably one of them.
Okay, if there are no other questions from the RAC, we will open it up to questions from the audience. If you have a question regarding this agenda item, please step up to the microphone, state your name, and then go ahead and proceed with your question. No questions from the audience. We'll ask Chris to give us a public comment summary.
We had 10 people fill out this survey question online. 30% strongly agreed, 30% somewhat agreed, 10% somewhat disagreed, and 30% strongly disagreed. As you know, all of our RAC members have received all the public comment as they came in through email, and they've had the opportunity to review all these comments and read them. But I will just mention briefly a few of the comments and what they said. The comment was to do something different with the Manti, for example, limited entry with weapons restrictions. Recommend shorter season dates. Several people support the 3-point or better idea. Disagrees with the buck-to-doe ratio on the San Juan Abajo unit. The CWMUs in the area have higher buck-to-doe ratios. The public land portion is currently much lower than what is being reported in the surveys. Split the Manti San Rafael unit into 2 different units, split right down the middle. Does not support reduced buck-to-doe objectives on general units. Several people support the restricted weapons proposals. A shorter archery season was suggested. Do not make the Thousands Lakes unit a limited entry. Hunt more bears. Have more predator control statewide.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, we'll move to comments from the audience. We'll start with Jeremy Anderson. He'll be followed by Troy Jefferson.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. Good afternoon, RAC. Thank you for the opportunity of speaking. Jeremy Anderson here with the Mule Deer Foundation. I was part of the Mule Deer Committee. Just wanted to give, I've sounded like a little broken record on these RACs, but give a little peek into what we've been doing on these in this meeting. A great diversity of people from all across state, as one of you guys have mentioned. In the beginning of these meetings, we had comment sections from the public that we'd go over. Eventually, we had our survey that we go over. And I think it's really important for me to know that you guys know that we take these seriously. And from that and going to my committees, my members, I felt like what we really wanted to do is give opportunity. And I think by some of these strategies we have here, the opportunity is there for more hunting and possibly growing more deer. So as Mule Deer Foundation, we fully support this plan.
Thanks, Jeremy. Troy, and Troy will be followed by Kevin Norman.
Troy Justinson, speaking tonight as a member of the Mule Deer Committee. Just like Jeremy said, had the opportunity to sit on that Mule Deer Committee. 10 meetings, over 40 hours, and kind of going through some of the stuff you guys discussed tonight. It wasn't easy. A lot of us, we have our personal ideas of what should be done, but based upon what was presented by people who were in the know, Brock, Randy, Kent, and others, we came up with a product which we feel is a good plan. Is it perfect? No, it's not. But as you pointed out, this is all fixed by Mother Nature, but we can't control Mother Nature. And one of the biggest things we addressed, wanted to address in this committee was that of the loss of opportunity. So trying to find some way to where we can curb the appetite to continue to reduce permit numbers in hopes in increasing quality. And that's where the restricted weapons come into play. So as myself sitting on the committee, I support this plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Kevin.
Kevin Norman representing SFW. SFW supports this plan in whole. Just like to say thanks to the division and the Deer Committee. If you've ever sat on one of these committees, you know how grueling it can be. I wasn't on this one, but I have been, and I know you discuss the topics inside out and backwards, and then a couple more times. So I know they kind of took a beating last night, but it's a little easier looking in than sitting there trying to hash out and make something that works for everybody. So appreciate their efforts and division and SFW sports plan. Thanks.
Okay, that was our last public comment, so we'll open it up for discussion with the RAC.
I just want to say, I don't know if we could do better at getting public comment. I guess as passionate as people are that have talked to me, I'm a little disappointed at how few comments we get. And I don't know if that's a problem on our end or just, I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I sure wish we could do something to get more comment from a broader range of people. So that probably has nothing to do with a decision we're making, but
Charles.
Yeah, one thing I do like to see in this plan is a big section on CWD. Obviously, there's nothing we can really do, like you said, once it gets into the population, but it feels like we're taking a large step at trying to address an issue that we've known has been an issue for a while. And I appreciate the committee putting that into the plan and making that an objective for us that gives us more tools in the toolbox and really sets a precedence and a stance that the DWR is going to take on this within the herd. So appreciate that.
Kirk.
Yeah, I just want to, thank the members of the committee and it's the ones that were able to come today too. And my opinion as far as the discussion is echoing exactly that. I don't think it's perfect. I think we could probably nitpick a few things, but I don't know that we're going to do any better. It's headed in the right direction.
Cash.
Yeah, I know we're sounding like a broken record, but I do want to thank the committee members and the division for taking the time to take those committees seriously. As a member of the public, I get to sit on the RAC now, but I haven't always been on the RAC. And I appreciate that we get an opportunity to collaborate on a solution that's good for our statewide resource that we all get to enjoy. And I'm going to have some comments on some of our later agenda items that I don't love on a couple things, but overall, I'm really happy with this plan and the effort that's being put forward and the willingness to try something new and see what that does for our mule deer herd and see what that does for our hunters here in the state. And like I said, I just appreciate the efforts that go into it. It gives me more confidence sitting here on the RAC, feeling like I had a RAC member and maybe other people that are like me that got to sit in 10 meetings and hash it out instead of the government just bringing me a plan and saying, we're here to help you. So I really appreciate that there's that process before we get there.
Dana?
Yeah, I was going to say, I also like the plan, but I am concerned about the comments about support the mule research being too restrictive. It sounds like it's going to preclude our discussion on the next item because by approving the plan, it says that we support it. And so I just wanted to kind of bring that up as maybe that's something we can consider suggesting that they broaden that language.
So I would suggest, Daniel, that as we make proposals, you include something there that doesn't preclude other hunt strategies. So Any other comments? Tyler?
One of the big words that is brought up is opportunity. But it has more than just one definition. And I think the definition that's been used is having a tag in your pocket. But what about having the opportunity to potentially take a deer if you have a tag in your pocket? For our young hunters, it's become a very special event that if the opportunity arises, you better capitalize on it, because you're not going to go around the corner and have that opportunity again, just based on the numbers and some of my experience. And so opportunity, yes, means having a tag in your pocket, being a field, being able to hunt. No, hunting does not guarantee the taking of an animal, but having an opportunity, potentially seeing something on the landscape is just as important.
I'll give my 2 cents worth. I get what Tyler's saying. I used to be one of the first ones that would come up here and say, got to cut tags. However, as we look back on the last 15 years, that's all we've done in the state of Utah is cut tags. Where's it got us? Has it made a difference? Do we have bigger bucks? Do we have more bucks? Not in my opinion. And that's why I've kind of changed the way I look at that. And obviously I'm getting older, so that's another factor. Some of these units take multiple years to draw a tag. For us old folks, that could mean only a couple of hunts that we get to participate in. Excuse me. I'm not okay with that, you know. Most of us are very passionate about hunting. That's why we're here. But not having the opportunity for me at least overshadows that need to have an opportunity for a big buck. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Any other comments, or do we open it up for motions? There are some things here, if we want to break it out, separate things, we can certainly do that. If Tyler, you got a comment?
So the portion that talks about the division having the ability to change tag numbers up or down 30% as they deem appropriate, I feel like that takes it, kind of excludes the public process a bit. I don't know that I have a percentage that I'd like to see, but that's kind of what the RAC is for. And I know it's never an easy discussion, and it's always the longest discussion on those nights as we watch the other RACs discuss. But yeah, I would prefer not to see that in there.
To kind of counter that, it's difficult to manage populations of large numbers. And when you take in all the data, because we've asked them to collect data, and when you look at data and have to make a decision, it's nice to be able to have that some flexibility. They're not asking for 50%, picked a number of 30%. And so there's some flexibility.
Do you have a number, a lesser number? I think I would feel more comfortable with. I feel like 30 is too high. that's a pretty big swing in permit numbers on a given unit.
But the swing would be based off the
then-
data.
And once the mule deer plan is in place, it's there for 6 years. And so over that time period, that's a lot of tag numbers or tags, additional or less.
Cash, you got a comment? These are good discussions and that's what this RAC's all about. So, I mean, we know what the proposal is. If the RAC feels differently, this is the time to make those proposals. We bring it up. If there's enough support, it'll pass and go on. If not, so be it. But, these are the kind of discussions we need.
And I just have a comment, which is if we're focused on data-driven decision-making and we don't know if we're going to have a dry year or a wet year, I feel like we have to have that flexibility in there to respond to the weather conditions that are driving this.
You know, I get the aspect that we kind of take the public option out of there, but that's why I asked the question earlier about how often, you know, what they do, the decisions, the recommendations they give are pretty spot on. There's a lot of science that goes into that. And yet I see year after year when we go to the different RACs and the different regions, those numbers get changed sometimes significantly. And I'm as guilty of that as some of the other guys. So I'm not excluding myself, but I do think that there's a decent reason for that. Now, is 30% too much? I don't know. That's our option. So that's what's proposed. If we want to propose something different, now's the time to do it. I'll open it up for motions. Don't everybody speak at once.
Well, I guess I can try. I don't feel like I have the language quite correct because it hasn't been, sorry, Brandon told me I had to move it closer. I would say I'd make a motion to accept the proposal as presented from the Division of Wildlife with one change. And my ask would be that the wording for support mule deer research studies to investigate the use of restricted weapons and antler point restrictions is broadened to indicate that when we approve the plan, it's to approve research studies for the population management.
To include other options.
Yes, it feels uncomfortable to have it written that restrictive because it precludes our discussion on the next item.
Okay, we have a motion on the table.
I'll second that motion.
Motion is seconded. Any discussion on the motion? You got the motion, Chris? Okay. All in favor of that motion, raise your hand. All opposed? Okay, that motion, let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 to 1. Nope, 8 to 1, sorry. All right, Tyler, do you want to clarify anything why you opposed it?
I think just the items I discussed, up to the ratios and the ability for the division to make those changes without public input.
Okay, thanks, Tyler. Okay, that brings us to our next agenda item. Kent, Any clarifications you'd like to make before we open it up to questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make two quick clarifications. There's some confusion going around about why we're proposing this, as we made a similar proposal last fall. So just want to clarify where we're coming from. We did take around a research proposal looking at restrictions in southern Utah last fall. Through the RACs, that was met with some support, some against. What the board asked us to do was, since the Mule Deer Committee was being convened and the plan was being updated, they wanted that to go through the committee and get their thoughts on it. So what we're proposing this year is coming out of what was discussed in the Mule Deer Committee and what they're recommending. Additionally, for the antler point restriction, there was some confusion as to, we're recommending youth being able to take any buck. What happens if they're being mentored? And the answer is they need to follow the restrictions of that mentor tag. So if the youth draws their own tag, they can kill any buck. If they're under a mentor of an adult permit, they would need to follow that antler point restriction.
Okay, thanks, Kent. Okay, we'll open it up to questions from the RAC. Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, this 4-point restriction on one side, that has been tried in other areas, correct? Has that worked?
It hasn't been tried in this format. Other places have done 4-point or better. We've done 3-point or better. Almost all states across the West have done some sort of antler point restriction. Generally, what most have found is that it's putting your hunting pressure all on that older age class buck. So it's actually, although it might increase the number of bucks on the landscape, it's decreasing the number of mature bucks on your landscape. With this situation, what we're proposing is the 4-point or better to try and save not just the yearling bucks, but also the 2-year-olds, which would then allow more bucks getting into that 3-year-old and mature buck age class for the next hunting season. It's something that the committee was mixed on. It was very divided. It kind of kept coming up, and eventually it was agreed upon to try it. So I'm just wanted to try it to get a final answer, because there's obviously, we hear it quite a bit through the RAC process, and so there's still not agreement certainly not from our hunting public about whether it works or not. And I think there's comments in the RAC tonight about people wanting to try it. So there's still distrust or confusion about what's there, and so that's why I think the Mule Deer Committee wanted to go and try it and see what the results are and see if we can get some conclusion to this.
Okay, and then I guess it's a research proposal, but it's not going statewide. We're doing research to figure out what it does to that single unit. Once we figure that out, is this something the DWR thinks that they might want to implement statewide, or is this unit by unit kind of thing, or is this something that is just to try and then figure it out later?
It ultimately depends on the results and what people think of it and is it accomplishing what we're hoping to. And for all these, what the committee was trying to get at is, can we increase the amount of hunting opportunity while still increasing the opportunity to harvest mature bucks? And so that's what we're really trying to look at these through the lens of. I don't ever see any of them going full statewide. So they would all be picked and chosen in different areas. But it ultimately depends on what the results are and what public think of it. Are they putting in for it? Are they avoiding it? How is it affecting draw odds and applications across different units?
And then within this research proposal, is there going to be studies done on the survival of those yearling to 2-year bucks into that 3-4 year category to see if this is really bringing those to that level, or if they're dying naturally off and we're losing opportunity for harvest and food for folks?
Yeah, and that's something that we started looking at last year. We've been getting collars on buck fawns, the 6-month-olds, and then they grow up, and the ones that survive that first year, they're becoming yearling fawns and 2 years. So we get some throughout, and we've had some other projects where we've collared bucks and looked at movements mainly. Last year we started in southern Utah on 4 units collaring yearling bucks, because we had some evidence that maybe they have really low survival, and we wanted to get a better handle on that. we had really good survival this past year, about 70%. So now we have a bunch of 2-year-old bucks on the landscape, and we're also collaring a bunch of yearling bucks this year too. So a lot of the literature in the past has always said buck and doe survival is the same. They also said all adults survive at the same rate once they reach 1. And so we're getting a lot more data by age and by sex that is disagreeing with that, and we're trying to fine tune it. And so yes, we are definitely looking at survival of all age classes of bucks and does.
I've got a question. I'm sure there was a lot of discussion on what units to implement this study. Can you kind of explain how that came about and some of the discussion on it?
Sure. And yeah, there was a lot of discussion. Pretty much all units were put out there as options. Initially our proposal that we came up with last fall was focused on Southern Utah, and that's where most of the comments that we're hearing for where to do these studies were from Southern Utah residents. And so that's why that was the focus initially. And I think a lot of that, especially for antler point restrictions, Pine Valley was the one that kept coming up. There really wasn't much support for other units. And so that's why it's only being proposed on that one unit. In terms of the restricted weapons, some people wanted it in their backyard to try and help with them getting tags more frequently. Some people, who didn't like it, they wanted to avoid their spots, but all units were brought up and discussed. We did have some issues. We didn't want to make things too complicated with units with early weapon hunts where we didn't want to have a restricted hunt going on when a spike elk hunt with regular rifles was going on, and we had some there. So we did try and avoid some of those things, just from a logistical and law enforcement nightmare that would be. But committee members pretty much brought up their own units and decided which ones they wanted to look at. Ultimately, we landed on the Boulder just to try and increase quality and opportunity there. That was of interest for a while down there. Cash, they wanted a unit outside of Southern Utah to have a productive unit that they could try this on. And then with beaver, kind of a new unit that we wanted to try it on, just carving off a chunk of the beaver as a whole and just having that Beaver West portion. And then the Thousand Lakes, since we've kind of struggled to manage that over the years, it hasn't worked as a pure limited entry. It hasn't worked as a pure general season. So this was an opportunity to try something new on it and provide some opportunity for that traditional archery hunting, which we did get a lot of comments on that and people wanted to see. So we wanted to try it, but not go too big on it without knowing how many people are truly interested in that type of a hunt.
Thank you.
I had a question, Kent, before I have to start calling you Dr. Hersey. Have the other studies looked at kind of both the weapons restrictions and the antler point restrictions? Or are you worried about the compounding effects of these two variables?
Help me understand. What did you mean by other studies?
So like you said, previous studies have shown that those antler point restrictions have like a impact on hunting pressure and these bigger bucks. Were those in areas that also had weapons restrictions?
No, they were pure. And that's why we're keeping them separate. So Pine Valley is not being proposed as weapons restrictions. We just are hoping to look at that from an antler point restriction side and maintain, and we want to manage at that buck-doe ratio, the objective, so that we're not confounding it with increasing buck-doe ratios as well. For the weapon point restrictions, there's not a whole lot out there. So that's something we really want to look at is see what it does to success, what it does to, even if we manage at the buck-doe ratio objective, does it change the amount of mature bucks on the landscape? So are they not being as selective? And so we're not taking that top end off every year. But instead, people are either not taking an animal or they're harvesting just an animal out of opportunity, like maybe a younger animal that they normally wouldn't have, and allowing more mature bucks on the landscape and providing additional hunting opportunity for them.
Kent, I have a question. I know where the Pine Valley proposal kind of come from. Question is, what are your guys' thoughts? Is this something, say, for instance, the LaSalle, where we have a high prevalence of CWD? Is this hunt strategy something where it puts the pressure on that older age class of buck? Would that be something that would be good, or would the fear of higher buck to doe ratios offset that?
Yeah, I think the older bucks are the ones that I'll start by saying I am not an expert in CWD. So, but from what I understand, the increase of bucks would be problematic too, because yearling bucks also can disperse like popcorn and they can get it, and just, they might not have the same prevalence as some of those 5, 6, 7-year-old bucks. They still can be positive, as can the 2-year-olds, and you're still going to have those older bucks in the landscape too. So just doing something that would increase the older bucks would cause some concern as well. And I don't know if this would be something that we'd really be interested in.
Okay, thank you. Cash?
So with these research proposals on these specific units, and I feel like this is kind of coming from the committee and from the division. So was the committee and the division committed to managing those units to the buck to doe ratio that has been agreed upon, even with while these research proposals are going on? Is that the intent?
That is the intent, yes.
Okay.
And the main purpose, and I think I can speak pretty well for the committee, they wanted to try and do both. A lot of what we hear is, can hunters, when we ask hunters what they want to hunt for mature bucks, and they want to do it every year, and they want to do it by themselves. And so obviously they don't go together, right? So what we're hoping to do, instead of cutting tags, we know we can cut tags and get more mature bucks. That's easy. But can we provide opportunity, keep the tags the same at a minimum, or hopefully increase tags and still provide opportunity for that mature bucks? And so if we allow that buck doe ratio to go up, that gets rid of the whole cutting the tag part of it. And the whole point would be, that would kind of get rid of the whole point of what we're trying to look at.
Darren?
So I'm curious, what does success look like? At what point do you say, okay, now we want to implement this somewhere else?
That's going to vary by individual, right? We just want to see what it actually does. What does it do to overall just harvest success? We expect it to be more difficult with restricted weapons, obviously, and we would expect that to go down. Is that something that is acceptable to hunters? Does it increase mature bucks in the population? So we have our classification data to look at that. And is that going to show up in there? And if it does, that could be viewed as, some people, hey, I want to hunt mature bucks. This increases that. That's something I want to do. What does it do to the ability to provide permits? And so can we actually provide more hunting opportunity with these strategies? What does it do to overall, I lost my train of thought, sorry, but yeah, but can we provide more tags? Can it provide more quality? And then the social side, what applications look like? Are these strategies something that hunters are really interested in and they're putting in for, or are they avoiding them? If there's something that we have a huge demand for these, that clearly says that it's something that our hunting public wants, that would indicate we probably should look at offering more opportunities like this. Are they avoiding it? We've had several hunts that we started in year one, every tag goes, and then we're getting limited entry hunts out, like that Mighton hunt, where it's all private land, really difficult. They go undersubscribed because people just don't want it. That's a pretty good indication that that's not working well, and that's why we're recommending some changes for that. So there's lots of different ways to look at it, and we'll just kind of take that into and see what it looks like, and ultimately run it past the next committee.
And I have one more question with regards to that. As we monitor the success, the hunter satisfaction, the application period, I guess the only one of the concerns that I have is we started out too small. I told Dax this earlier, if I were king for a day, I would love to have seen a restricted weapons unit in each of the 5 regions. Troy brought up something, with the boulder, that's where he likes to hunt. His anticipation is that it will be easier to draw, which I think it will for the first few years. My concern is, because it's the only unit or there's only the 2 units, once, if it does what we think it's going to do and it puts older, more mature bucks on the landscape, how many more people are going to flock to those units? So as we look at that, what's the concern there? I guess if the application rate goes up, is there an opportunity to expand those type of things to where we limit that?
Sure. And I think you had 2 comments on that. Is that we're proposing as a 4-year study. So if we do see some changes like that, it's not that long of a period. And that's kind of some of the data that we are interested to seeing. Is it going to draw people in, suggesting that this is something that people have a real desire for, and maybe we can look at it. The other big thing is, so that the study is proposed as 4 years, but we will be back here in 3 years, assuming the 3-year season dates get approved. And so I think that would be a great opportunity. So if we see something in the first 3 years, maybe even before the end of the official study, we could provide these additional opportunities on different units. So I think we could stop short of it without too much difficulty. But part of what you're asking for is exactly what we want to know. Does it change things, and does it change it for the better or for the worse?
Okay, thanks.
My question was kind of on the same realm, but the opposite effect. I'm interested to see if applications for these units increase or if they decrease as people don't want to deal with the additional restrictions, and where those hunters decide to go to put their application in. And if that is moving less hunters to apply towards these units and more hunters to apply towards other units, obviously limiting opportunity on other units.
Yeah, and again, I'll use the same, it's exactly what we want to find out. I think worst case scenario, we have that effect for a few years. We can make adjustments if absolutely needed. But that's the kind of stuff we're looking for, because we hear it on both ends. Some people are being like, everybody's going to want this. Everybody's going to put in for Pine Valley because it's going to be so great. We're hearing other people say this is not what people are wanting. They're going to go elsewhere. And I'm anxious to see what the effect might be.
Keeps you on the seat of your chair, right?
Yeah. If we knew the answer to all that stuff, I don't think we'd be proposing it as a research study.
Any other questions from the RAC? We'll open it up to questions from the audience. I don't see anybody rushing to the mic. Chris, can you give us the online summary, please?
Yeah, we had 14 people respond to the survey question online. 50% strongly agree, 7% somewhat agree, 14% neither agree nor disagree, 21% somewhat disagree, and 7% strongly disagree. Some of the comments, just in quick summary, was to add the manti to the units where the research proposal is being done. Youth should not be allowed to harvest any bucks. It takes away from the research. 3 people said they strongly supported the research. They support a research, but suggest looking at antler width restrictions instead of antler point restrictions. Does not support the proposal on the cash unit. It'll cost hunters money as they'll have to buy new guns. Another person supports research and wants it expanded to the Manti, 9 Mile, LaSalle's, and Abajos. About 3 people said similar comments. And then finally supports eliminating high power, long range scopes on rifles.
Okay, thanks. We will move to public comment. We'll start with Jeremy Anderson, followed by Kevin Norman, followed by Troy.
Thanks again, Jeremy Anderson with the Mule Deer Foundation. Once again, we looked at this as some opportunities in the committee. Some of these were a little off the wall to me. I'm not big on the antler restrictions. I don't want to shoot, a wrist rocket and, all these little different things that we tried. However, I think with the committee, there was a lot of back and forth and everything, but we came to at the beginning of this committee, we decided as we vote as a committee. And that's what I'm here to say is, that we support this plan in full. It was voted by as the committee, and I think it's going to offer some opportunity and some great research. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Jeremy. Kevin.
Kevin Norman representing SFW. We support the recommendations with a couple exceptions, one being the Pine Valley and the Antler Point restriction. We're not favorable of that for a few reasons. Potentially launching the buck to doe ratio through the roof, and the way to curb that's more tags, and it could, where the sky's the limit, it could become a problem. There's several other problems with the Antler Point restriction. Also on the cache, we would propose that the cache be split. The north cache would be the restricted weapons. South cache would remain the same. That'd give people a little more leeway to choose where they wanted to hunt, how they wanted to hunt within the cache unit. Just a couple things to add. Overall, we support the weapons restrictions idea. Tyler, I loved your point of, what's success. I watched my little boy, 12 years old last year, hunt his butt off with his bow, and we'd come home and he'd rehash to his mom, the story of how he screwed up this time. But the excitement is that he got to see bucks literally every time. And he had opportunities, although he never harvested a buck last year. It was a hunt of a lifetime for him. And so for me, this is the same effect with these restricted weapons, that the thought of being able to see good bucks is exciting. And to have stories of the ones that got away again is exciting to me, even if it's going to be dang hard. I think it's going to work, and we really have nothing to lose. And if it doesn't, we can figure something else out later, but let's give it a shot. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. And Troy, that's our last public comment card.
Troy Jessenson, speaking on behalf of the Mule Deer Committee. Just a question to you guys there. Did you guys get your Dear John letter today? Sportsman's tags?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's the bummer. See, the division promised us everybody that sat on that committee would be successful, and apparently there's a mistake on mine. So, no. In all honesty, I just speak a little bit to what you guys have been talking about. This Antler Point restriction, holy cow. I think we voted on it how many times? 4, 3, something like that. It failed, and then finally come back. And really, it was just kind of wore us out as committee. Finally said, hey, let's do it. Put it to bed one final time, whether it works or not work, whatever. And so that's kind of what we agreed to. I know this isn't part of this discussion, but just to address the 30%. It was extremely frustrating in the past as we asked the division to manage to an objective, and they would come with numbers with permit recommendations based upon the data and the science. And then we'd say, no, we're cutting permits, and just out of impulse. And so the committee looked at it in a sense saying, no, we have to put some trust in these guys, and that they have the correct numbers and coming forward. And so that's really what that was. And quite frankly, I think we can trust them now that Kobe and Justin have moved on to different positions. So I think we're good there. So no, all joking aside, I support the recommendations as the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Troy. We'll open it up for RAC discussion. Charles?
I think the thing to remember here is these are our research. It's not a for sure that it's going to be happening to all of our units, and it doesn't preclude the future, although there might be some changes based on the research. I think I am not very much in favor of the Antler Point restrictions myself. I think that if you buy a tag and you want 2-point tacos that year, that should be up to you and not for the division to decide. Or somebody who wants an easier hunt on a general unit, harvesting large bucks is difficult, and putting in time and doing that is going to be difficult, and to take opportunity away from somebody else so you can be easier for you to harvest a large buck seems unfair to me. But I do like the diversity of opportunity that this is putting in. You don't have to hunt the Pine Valley if you don't want to, and you can hunt some of these other units that have these restricted weapons, which I think gives you a real fun, different style of hunt. And it's an opportunity thing. It gives you diversity within the state, to play in different rules. And I think that's pretty cool.
Thanks, Charles. Cash?
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I do want to put out there, I don't care for the 4-point rule proposal at all. I hope we do put it to bed. Or I hope I eat my words, but either way, I want us to stop talking about it. So I guess I'm not going to vote against it, but I do want to air just a grievance that I think it's pretty interesting that something on a committee can be voted down 4 times. And then by some miracle, we can eke it through on a majority vote on the 5th or 6th time we decided to bring it up. So I hope we do get to put it to bed and we don't have to deal with it much more after this.
Kirk?
Yeah, I'll, I mean, I think that a lot of the research is there as far as the biology of it, but you know, maybe this is more of a social experiment than anything. And from that point, I'm okay to try that 4-point or better. Cause yeah, I think, it will be interesting to see if it scratches that itch, because that itch is obviously there. But more from that, and then actually thinking it's going to change anything for the better on the biology.
Dana, do you have a comment?
Yes, I'm usually one of the first people to say more data is better. But in this case, I guess my comment or things to discuss on this 4-point is this has been studied. There are a lot of papers out there. The Western Association, Western Association for Fish and Wildlife Agencies has a great document on how 4-point or better strategies work and don't work. And so I think staff time and I think funding are limited. And oftentimes, if we know the answer there, my suggestion would be, let's consider focusing our research on the weapon strategies and habitat and not 4-point or better.
Tyler?
I do like the weapon restrictions opportunities. That will be definitely interesting to see going forward. To be able to watch your kid chase deer, even if it's with a restricted weapon, I think that's as good an opportunity as you could ask for, whether they kill one or not, but having that opportunity is vital. What else do I gotta say? I think the point restriction, it is a little different where they're gonna allow youth to harvest anything. That kind of allows harvesting of everything in the entire unit still. It could be turned into an awesome youth hunt where they're shooting giant 3-points, or a bunch of lifetime license holders who eat up a lot of the adult tags. And I know that was a concern with some of the other RACs, but no, I like the idea of those weapons. My hope is that they allow more opportunity for everybody, youth included.
I'll make a comment. I was not on the deer committee. I was, however, an alternate for Scoot. He couldn't be there. And the meeting that I did attend for him, this was the topic of discussion. Because I was an alternate, I did get to see the public comments that all of the committee got to see. I believe there was 82 pages of public comments. I read probably 30 of those pages. And I would say that hands down, from what I read, that that was probably the most commented thing from the public, was they wanted to see antler point restrictions. I know it's been tried in different manners in, in other states and even in Utah, but I support the study. I honestly believe that Pine Valley was probably the worst possible unit to implement that on, just because of the history of it being over the buck to doe ratio for years. However, I do support the idea of it. I just, for one thing, like Kent mentioned, it hasn't been done under these parameters. We didn't have the ability to track to see if it makes a difference or not, whether it's negative or positive. We have those abilities now. And I think once it's done, we'll see whether it's negative or positive. And like Troy said, we put it to bed. Right now, I know that when the division says we've tried it, it doesn't work, that doesn't hold a lot of weight with the public. And even after this, there will be some that won't believe it. So, but I do think that it's worth trying, just simply for that reason. And I definitely think that the restricted weapons hunts will provide some more opportunity. I'm a big proponent of those. So that's my 2 cents. Dana, did you have more comment?
I guess I just had a question, and maybe it's for Kent, but is there any way to tell now how many adult hunters would be there, like in ratio or proportion to the youth hunters, since youth can harvest anything? And so like if youth are 50% of our tags there, I mean, are we going to be able to tell anything?
So it should be at least 20%. They're allocated to 20% of the draw, so they'll get that, and then they go into the main draw, and so they can get another point. So it should be at least 20%, potentially 25. I would never say it approaching 50 or anything like that.
I know there was a lot of discussion about the youth portion skewing the data. And I get that, but I know Kent made a comment, excuse me, last night that kind of put it into perspective for me. If we were ever to implement this moving forward, that would be the way that it would be implemented, with the youth being able to harvest. So to me, it makes sense. Even though it may skew the data a little bit, it still makes sense to me to allow to do the study in the same manner that it might be implemented if it's successful. You have a comment?
I don't. I was here in case there was, but I think you hit it well. Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately a social decision on what we want to allow. I think we can control for it if we allow youth to harvest it. It's obviously not quite as pure as exactly what the effect of an APR would be, but I think we can account for it, and it won't be that horrible in terms of the biological side or the social side. But I will say, I guess, one extra point. I'm pretty sure this would not have been supported by the committee if we didn't have that addition in there. It was right on the fence, and I think adding that to it is what probably pushed it over the edge. So it was kind of important not to restrict the youth too much to the committee.
I just had a question, Kent, about this and the potential interaction with CWD. Are there plans to be doing things to kind of look at potential CWD impacts?
So Pine Valley doesn't have CWD, so I don't think we're concerned at that point. As Eric brought up earlier, on the LaSalle's, so I don't think this is something that we'd want to look at on the LaSalle's. We wouldn't go ahead in these high prevalence units and try and do strategies that may impact the buck-to ratio or raise it. So we'd want to kind of go with the tried and true methods there as best we can to keep it as low as we can.
Any other comments? Cash? Okay. If not, we will open it up for motions. And there was a couple of different things, the cash being split. We can address it, break it up however you guys want. But we'll open it up for you guys for motions.
I move that we approve the proposal of the division to implement this study in its entirety.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Brad to accept the presentation as the division has presented it. Seconded by Charles. Any discussion on the motion? Tyler?
Would you be willing to add the recommendation from SFW to split the cash north and south to the restrictions on whatever end that you spoke on the north end, and then just keep it as is on the south?
You better ask the entire group, not just me.
It's your motion, Brad, so you can accept it or you don't have to accept the amendment.
I say leave it like it is.
Okay. So we have a motion on the table. It's been seconded. Any other discussion? If not, we'll bring it to a vote. All those in favor, raise your hand. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those opposed, raise your hand. We have one opposed and one non-vote. Sunshine, would you like to elaborate on your?
Well, I guess I just feel like the 4-point strategies have been tried. Maybe the public wants them to be tried, but they can read the literature. So that would be the thing that I would say.
Okay, thank you. Dana didn't vote.
I'll go opposed.
Opposed? So it passed 7-2. Dana, do you want to make any comment?
Just the same, the
Okay,
research there.
opposed to the 4-point strategy. Okay. That takes us to the next agenda item. Bucks and Bull hunt tables and dates. Dax is back up. Any clarifications, Dax, before we open it up for questions?
I think we can just dive in. We've got 3 years worth of dates. Not a lot of big monumental changes, basically continue with the same season date structure. We've had a few new hunts, few discontinued hunts. Those are, we're in the presentation in the packet. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I'll start.
Kirk.
The Ochre Stansberry, it's not very often that somebody approaches me about something going up there, being on this rack. How did that discussion go in their rack? Because I've had people reach out and talk to me specifically about that division not being ideal.
Yeah, so in the central region, when we discussed that agenda item, we had the district biologist for that unit, and he shared some data and talked about the process and kind of what led to making that recommendation there. As we've had our GPS callers out on representative units around the state over the years, we've seen that in a lot of cases when we drew our unit boundaries back in the day, in a lot of cases, our biologists had it right. The unit boundaries are pretty close. There's usually a little overlap here or there on an edge, but pretty close. We do try to match our unit boundaries to our actual herd movements on the ground. And that was something that the callers had indicated to the biologist there on that district, that unit, that those deer from the Stansbury Mountain Range there wasn't movement back and forth between the Okers and the Stansburys, and those deer from the Stansburys went down onto the Tinnick unit. And so that's what led to the change there, to try to match our unit scale to the actual deer populations and movements. And we recognize that that's a change. There definitely are folks that, maybe enjoyed hunting both of those mountain ranges. But the intent is to try to set our unit boundaries up to match our deer herds and their movements and how they use the landscape.
How did they vote on that one?
They approved it.
Thanks.
They actually did have also a unit committee that's they formed a unit committee that sat down that was comprised of, it's kind of like we do it for a statewide plan revision committee, but it was a unit committee. It had, landowners and federal land management agencies and sportsmen's representatives, and they went through, and that was also part of the process. And you'll see in the next RAC cycle, the biologist for that unit is going to bring out revised unit management plans that reflect those changes to the boundaries and some of their changes to their elk unit population objectives based on the changes to those boundaries. So there'll be a follow-up with even more information on that. So I just thought it'd be good for you to know that they did form a unit management plan committee that went through, that was also part of that process.
Yeah, absolutely. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Cash.
Dax, I know you got asked this in another one, but I want to ask it just because maybe the squeaky wheel gets the grease type of thing. Okay. And I know we're not voting on this tonight. It's not a proposed change, but has there been any discussion recently by the division changing the name of our any bull tags? I'm getting I know there's things with the legislature and Lindy and a whole lot of things, but if we could take a look at that, I'm getting real concerned about the number of people I run into the mountain that take any bull very, very literally. And it's just run up on a mountain, find an elk, put it down, and describing to them, well, have you looked at a map, especially in the proclamation, that really tries to break that out for you? The answer is no. And I realize that's on all of us own sportsmen to know what the rules are and follow them. But if we could help in any way, we're always talking about recruitment, and I can't believe how many people that I grew up with that never hunted that are hunting now for the first time in their life because it's something they want to experience and do, and they didn't grow up understanding the difference between any bull and a spike tag and a limited entry bull tag. And so is there any discussion on a name change for the any bull permits?
Sometimes we throw our hands in the air because some of our names are quite long because we're trying to be really descriptive. The early draw only, youth, any bull, hunter's choice, elk permit. There's some of them that, and the reason some of those names are so long is because we're trying to avoid confusion. I don't know, maybe this is something like I can put heads together with Lindy and some of our staff and see if there are clearer ways, or if maybe there's some outreach we can do to try to help people realize, as a hunter, it is your responsibility to know where you can legally hunt. And if you have an any bull permit, you cannot run up on the San Juan and shoot any bull you see, and anywhere on the San Juan. So I can make a commitment to you that I'll put heads together with our outreach team and see if there's a way, maybe before next hunting season, to try to, maybe we can put out some social media or something to help folks remember you've got to check and see where you're at. And I would encourage you, if you do run into folks that are hunting the wrong units or harvesting animals on the wrong units, we need to refer that stuff to our law enforcement officers. And I think, part of the reason we have law enforcement is that it's a deterrence for folks to not do their due diligence, and we're not looking to ruin anybody's life. But if people are harvesting animals on the wrong units with the wrong permits, there should be consequences for that. And hopefully, in a way that can get the word out and help us to have better compliance as well. And we can keep talking about names. It's a hard one, but I appreciate the feedback.
I think we should keep it because I want to find somebody. It might be the only way I get a tag, poaching rewards tag.
It is interesting too. A lot of folks that serve on a RAC or involved in a sportsman's organization or something. and even division employees, we're in it up to our eyeballs all the time, to where for us, a lot of times it makes perfect sense. We can't even wrap our head around, someone could be confused by it. But I've had the same experience where I talk to someone sometimes that, there's a barrier to entry to getting into hunting and fishing. It takes some time. There's a learning curve. There's some investment in educating yourself and becoming familiar with all the acronyms and vernacular and all the stuff we use. And, we're working hard to try to make things easier for folks. And there's more work to do there too, probably.
I have a question, and maybe I missed something here on the late limited entry elk season dates. The Morgan South Ridge and then the Dolores Triangle much later than the other seasons. And then the Dolores Triangle on 2027 is a shorter season than the previous seasons. What's the difference with those units and the change?
Yeah, so we do have a few. There's that Morgan South Ridge hunt, and also there's an East Canyon hunt. Those are new ones we're recommending this year that when we revised the elk plan a couple years back, we talked about, those are both on general season elk units, the East Canyon unit, Morgan South Ridge unit. We talked about creating some unique opportunities to harvest surplus animals on those units. Are both way over objective. They have a lot of private lands, but then later in the year, there are some elk that would be available to public sportsmen that move down onto public lands. That's the idea behind those hunts. The Dolores Triangle is one that, just based on migration timing, we've always had later season dates there. Sometimes the adjustments, because we don't open hunts on Sundays, sometimes it changed the lengths of the hunt just slightly. And I don't know if the region has anything to add to that, but unless it's a huge change in the season length, it's probably because of an adjustment. If it's just a day or two, it's probably, we made an adjustment so it didn't open on a Sunday.
It's 5 to 6 days shorter.
Shorter?
Mhm.
Which one would that be? And well, that's one of the other things too that happens. We have some hunts that have set end dates that end, the 15th or 30th or 20th of a month. And then when in 2027, as our whole season date structure shifts almost 6 days later, sometimes that will affect some of those hunts that have set end dates, like Paunsaugunt Premium Limited Entry Deer Hunt. If you were wanting to draw that permit and wanted a lot of days to hunt, you'd much rather draw it in 25 or 26 than in 27, because in 2027, it's only a 9-day hunt because it ends the 31st of October. But if you draw it on one of those years when the deer hunt opens on the 18th or something rather than the 23rd, it can make a big difference. So it sounds like it has to do with those set ending days and the shifts that kind of affect everything as the deer hunt shifts.
Okay, yeah, I see. This one definitely has a set ending date of January 31st. I guess my curiosity with that unit is why it has a set ending date of the 31st.
Some of those ones with really long late seasons. I don't know. I don't know if there's a great reason, probably because that's how we've done it in the past.
Okay.
We keep it interesting. Some of them are always a Saturday through the next Sunday, or some of them are on a Wednesday, some of them are on the 1st, some of them are on the 31st. I don't know. We keep you guessing, I guess.
I have a question for you, and in all reality, it probably should have been asked during the deer plan part, but how much discussion was there on the committee? I know the one meeting that I attended, there wasn't any discussion about season dates or moving season dates. How much discussion was there, or was there any discussion with the committee as far as looking at moving or adjusting some of the hunt season dates?
Yeah, interesting you asked that. There was less discussion about that than I maybe thought there would have been. As a guy who grew up in southern Utah, I remember the 5-day hunt being something that people were really passionate about. I expected that the committee might have a lot of conversations about shorter hunts or adjusting season date structure. And it just wasn't something that gained much traction with the committee. From the division standpoint, the dates and the season structure and lengths seemed to be working okay. The committee wasn't really interested in making changes. We didn't talk about it much. And when we did the public survey and reached out to 12,000 deer hunters that participate in the survey. The folks that responded pretty much said they were generally satisfied with the current season structure and timing and length of hunts. So it just, yeah, wasn't a whole lot of discussion there. I thought maybe there'd be more and there wasn't.
Okay, thanks. We do have one more RAC member. Scoot has joined us online. Thanks, Scoot. Do you have any questions or comments for Dax?
No, just took us a lot.
We lost you. We only heard part of it. Okay, Steve.
Am I understanding right that mid-season limited entry blowout, it overlaps with the spike?
Yep.
Has there been discussion about that? Is this the logic behind it? Help me understand that a little bit. I've heard a lot of grievance about that from those that have drawn that tag.
Yeah, you know, that's a season that has existed for quite a while, but we didn't have it on all the units in the state. And when we went through that elk plan revision a couple years back, that was one where we looked at expanding and offering, you know, putting that hunt on. Now we have it on almost all elk units in the state. It's a longer season, but we recognize it is right on top of general season, you know, spike hunting. Part of the idea with the limited entry elk hunts when we redid the elk plan was that there would be more, we could potentially issue more permits if more of those were issued during season dates where it's harder to harvest top end bulls. And, you know, we reduced the number of permits that we give in that early rifle September hunt and shortened that hunt as well. And we give more permits. The bulk of the rifle permits are during that October season date that does overlap with spike hunters. And yeah, I had a call from a guy that drew that permit and he was really frustrated because he felt like there were spike hunters on top of him. And I said, well, why didn't you put in for the early one in September? And he said, well, because I never would have drawn it. And I said, well, that's kind of the trade-off. You know, I'm not trying to be mean to the guy. I understand it can be really frustrating if you feel like somebody messes your hunt up, but that is kind of the idea behind it, is that it's a trade-off. It is probably easier to draw, and there's probably a decent chance that some spike hunters might mess you up as well. Yeah, I hope folks realize that. Yeah.
I got another question on CWD hunts. Are those tags being allocated out of the pool of tags for the general unit? And if you draw like a general LaSalle deer tag, are you still able to hunt those units, the Castle Valley and the Moab units, while you have that tag?
So the limited entry hunts would be in addition to whatever we're doing on the general season dates. And you would still be able to hunt those areas. If you drew a general season LaSalle permit, you'd still be able to hunt those areas. But these late hunts would be, you know, just specific to the boundaries drawn for those hunts. And those would be in addition to whatever's allocated as a general season permit.
Okay, and then you just said limited entry. Are those going to be considered a limited entry tag to where you burn your limited entry deer?
Yep, and incur a waiting period, all that.
For the CWD hunt?
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions? Now we'll open it up to questions from the public. I don't see anybody, so online summary.
All right, we had 7 people respond to this survey question. 14% strongly agreed, 29% somewhat agreed, 29% neither agreed nor disagreed, 14% somewhat disagreed, and 14% strongly disagreed. Some of the comments were entailed eliminating the early rifle big bull hunt. There was support to split the manti, change the objectives to 6 to 6.5. Supports adding 5 days back to the front end of the LE elk archery hunt. This proposal does not help point creep. And then finally, a comment that said they would like to see archery elk dates pushed back another week to September 24th, and then have the rifle hunt be after the muzzleloader hunt.
Okay, public comments. Well, have Troy, Justin, and then Kevin Norman. That's the only 2 comment cards we have.
Roy Jessenson, Sports and Fish and Wildlife. We support the recommendation with one exception. We've on the Oak Creeks, there's a proposed for an early hunt. And we had proposed that we just keep it the same with just the one hunt there, not add the early hunt on the Oak Creek limited entry deer. Thank you.
Kevin Norman representing myself. Tonight I have a proposal. If you've watched the other acts, has to do with the Paunsaugunt deer hunt. Currently as it sits, you have the premium buck tags and the management buck tags. Right now, for instance, the archery management hunt starts 10 days after the premium hunt starts. Muzzleloader starts later, and so on. My proposal would be to align those hunts, the management and the premium hunts on the archery and muzzleloader. And then as far as the rifle management hunts and the cactus buck hunts, to align those in the range of the first 3 weeks of November. The reason is that there's opportunity lost of hunting with friends and family. If I have enough points to draw a management buck tag and my dad has enough for a premium tag, we couldn't even hunt together. We're not even hunting the same bucks, but it kind of takes away that opportunity. It's so few tags. The archery and muzzleloader, I think there's 4 tags apiece. Have friends on the unit that support this. They live there. They kind of think it's an old thing that isn't relevant. And yeah, I guess that's my proposal, and thank you.
Kevin, just kind of clarify that for me. So go over that again. I'm not sure I caught exactly what you were proposing.
I know it's hard to explain, especially when you're as dumb as me. So it'd be to align the management buck hunts and the premium buck hunts on the archery and muzzleloader, the dates. So they would just run the same.
And that's for any units. We don't have the 2
It's just the-
premium units, right?
I think it's only on the Paunsaugunt is that the dates
Okay.
are shifted. And then as far as the rifle management, the ability we could do it after the hunts, and it would run the same time as the cactus buck hunts for the first 3 weeks of November. The whole idea is to harvest these management bucks. It's part of what makes these units successful and keeps the buck to doe ratio in check, and get rid of some of these less desirables with providing awesome opportunity. I mean, they're pretty coveted tags at this point, 15, 16 points to draw some of these management buck tags. So they deserve a good opportunity as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll open it up to RAC discussion. Charles, you look like you have a comment.
Always, right? I guess I didn't realize that these CWD hunts were going to be a limited entry hunt. I feel like it's doing the hunters and the DWR service to take out these deer that we think might have CWD. And looking at the units, there's very low public land that actually holds habitat in that area. And I think getting people to burn their limited entry points on these might not be fair to the hunter as much as benefit as everyone else is getting. I don't know there's much we can do about it here, but I do think that just making it a general unit that you could apply for to hunt later would be a better opportunity. to get rid of some of those deer.
Dax, you want to clarify any of that?
Yeah, I mean, now would be the time if there was a desire to make it a general hunt rather than a limited entry hunt. You know, we could do that. I think the reason we made it limited entry was just because, you know, November hunting for bucks is probably pretty coveted opportunity, even if it is maybe a little tricky access. And we're not, you know, we'll bring permit numbers in the spring for this, but it's not a hunt where we're looking to add, you know, hundreds of permits. I mean, we're thinking like 20, 30 permits per hunt in that ballpark, I think. So it might be super hard to draw with general preference points. And, you know, we had a CWD management hunt in the Northeastern region that was a limited entry hunt, and we had leftover permits after the draw last year. That unit was entirely private land, and that's why on a unit that's entirely private land, I think we're going to try a different strategy to issue CWD type permits in those areas. So I think it's a valid question, and now would be the time if you have a preference and want to do it differently on something like this that's new. We're taking a stab at it, and if you feel like we got it wrong and you want to do something different, now's the time to propose that.
Okay, thanks, Dax. I guess I kind of look at it as, yeah, it's an opportunity to maybe move a few more people through the point system, limited entry, if they're willing to burn their points for that hunt. So I don't know if, again, people have to know what they're putting in for, and that's their responsibility. So.
Yeah, I understand that. I think it just does more of a service to have more hunters on the ground filling those tags, where if once they find out they're burning their limited entry point, to shoot maybe the one or two large bucks that are in the public there, we're going to go unfilled, and it's not going to meet the requirements that we want it to.
Can you speak to that? I mean, if it doesn't go, if those tags go unfilled, then we're going to get somebody there, right?
That hunt, the limited entry one in Northeastern region last year, there were leftovers when they went on sale, you know, as a limited entry permit, they went on sale. You're still going to lose your preference points and incur the waiting period. You know, they sold like within 5 minutes after they went on sale.
Yeah, perfect. So they'll get used whether they're here or there. So might as well see if we can get some people out of that pool.
Any other discussion? Tyler?
I really think season dates and season durations could be a very useful tool in creating more opportunity. We argue a lot about deer tag numbers and buck to doe ratio, but season dates, how we manage those and timing of them definitely could play a large part in our deer management if we looked at making some changes there.
I just would like to make a comment that I actually like the idea of changing the hunt dates for the management tags on the Ponsagant. I don't see what the harm would be. The number of tags is low. We're trying to get the deer killed anyway. I think some of the seasons are too short really for what it is we're trying to accomplish. I think it would be a good thing to go along with that suggestion, and let's change those hunt dates for the management hunt in the Ponsagant.
Okay. If there's no other comments, we'll open it up for motions. So is that a motion you want to make, Cash?
I can. I feel like I'm gonna make a motion later tonight, so I don't want to burn up, you know, I only get so many motions in one of these meetings. Yeah, I'll make a motion. I make a motion that we accept the division's proposal as presented with the change that we align the management hunts on the Ponsagant to line up with the archery and the muzzleloader for the archery and muzzleloader management hunts, and then for the rifle hunt to line up with the cactus buck hunts. That's my motion.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion on the table by Cash. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second it.
Tyler seconded. Any discussion on the motion?
Is there any heartburn with that from anybody from the division?
As far as lumping those management hunts, the reason we had them separate was just because in the past, there'd been some desire from folks that drew the premium permits to have some solo days. Talked with the biologist last night. He hopes that the lumped cactus management, any illegal weapon hunts don't go too long, too late. You know, he figured, give them the first couple weeks in November is probably good. But, otherwise, if that's what the public wants, I think it works out.
Any other discussions? Okay, let's bring it to a vote. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. Scoot,
Yes.
that motion passes unanimously. Okay, that brings us to the next agenda item. Once in a lifetime hunt tables and dates.
Did we approve the rest of it? That was just,
Well, it was the whole thing.
That was-
As
yeah, that
proposed
was-
with that change.
just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, yep, that, it was included, so. Rusty, you are up. Any clarifications you'd like to make before we open it up to questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess just a quick Cliff Notes summary. These are also, 3-year season date recommendations. We're recommending to split the Escalante Desert Sheep Unit into Escalante West, Escalante East. Recommending to reopen the Antelope Island Rocky Mountain Bighorn Hunt. Some later hunt dates on sheep units. Recommending to change the hunt structure in the Bookcliffs Little Creek South Bison unit a little bit to solve some pressure issues we're having there. And then we're recommending a new bull moose hunt in Box Elder. So excited for that. But yeah, happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. I asked you the question up there. The reason for extending these, just to align with I take sportsman and governor's tag, right?
No, it's actually the conservation permits. So
Conservation permits.
yeah, to give a little bit of background, for I don't know how many years, probably 20 years plus. The way it was set up in rule, in the conservation permit rule, is that we would go to the board and ask for a variance for the conservation permit to hunt until the end of the year to differ from the public hunt dates. And that was always granted by the wildlife board. So we thought, why don't we just put that in the rule and we don't have to ask for it anymore. It's just kind of common practice now. And in doing that, it kind of generated some conversation and some of the sentiment is let's be fair to the public hunter. If we're going to let the conservation permit holder go to the end of the year, then let's let the public hunter go to the end of the year. And so it's actually generated some great conversation and maybe spurred some thoughts, maybe the other way to, well, maybe that's just rein in the conservation permit hunter then and have them match the traditional public dates that we've always done. And we're open to either. The board asked us to be fair on those dates, and we're happy to do that. The later it goes, it does create some potential conflicts for us with captures and helicopter surveys, and we don't want to mess up somebody's once in a lifetime hunt. And so those are just the issues there.
Okay, thanks, Rusty. Any other questions for Rusty? Tyler?
The conservation tags are those that are sold at auction?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, if there's no more questions from the RAC, we'll open up questions from the public. No questions, Chris. Online comments?
No comments, just one survey result that strongly agreed with the proposal.
Okay, we'll go to public comments. Troy Justison, followed by Christine Sheeter.
Troy Justin represents Department of Fish and Wildlife. We support the recommendation with one exception, and that's dealing with the conservation permits. We'd rather not see those dates extended to the 31st. I mean, that really puts a 3-month hunting season. Not only do we run the possibility of having a helicopter out there influencing somebody's hunt, but also it puts a lot of pressure on the top end of our animals. And so they already got 6 weeks. So we had asked that you move the conservation permit back to the traditional public end date of the public hunter. So that would be our recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Troy. And Christine.
Hello, I'm representing myself. I'm a landowner and I crashed this party because I was just driving by and I saw all your vehicles. I own 98 acres at the mouth of Desolation Canyon. The bighorn, mountain bighorn sheep come down and water my property. They seem to be being pushed more because of the activity, just public activity around Swayze's Beach and stuff because it's becoming more popular. And I just wanted to bring to your attention and any ears, real life in person is always a pleasure and more important. Bring to your attention that 38 acres are being sold next to my property and they've been parceled out as in 3 pieces. And these are the areas that the sheep pass through. So just so you know. And also prior to when I purchased the property, the mouth of the Green River was diked off and a whole oxbow and hatchery area has been dry for 40 years, 30 years. It can be reopened and I am happy, thrilled to work with anyone who wants to reopen that and reestablish a hatchery for the Colorado endangered species, fish species. And well, if this project goes through or whoever buys these parcels, that may not happen. And so, and I am working with the NRCS. We're doing pollinator habitat on my place. And it's, hoping to help the bighorns and pollinators. And Covey has my information and you guys have my information. So, thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Okay, that was our last public comment. We'll open it up for RAC discussion.
I just had a comment, which is, Christine, I appreciate you coming. And I think Stephen Duke was just talking about how we want to engage the broader public. So we're here for the public. So thank you for coming and sharing.
I like the idea that SFW roles. We talked about that earlier. I think that extending all those season dates out, I believe it was tried once before, correct me if I'm wrong, and there was a lot of problems. So I am, excuse me, I am in favor of, moving that conservation permits back to coincide rather than doing the opposite. So I think it's a good move. So.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I know we're I bet it feels silly, right? Because we're shooting ourselves in the foot because, we brought it through and said, hey, let's make them all the same so the public gets the same opportunity. And now you're coming to us with what we asked and we're saying, well, we don't exactly want it that way, right? And so I can't imagine how frustrating that is. And I know the decisions have already been made, things like that, but I am in agreement here. I think we really need to go the opposite direction. that the conservation permits need to be pulled back just to align with whatever the public dates are on the unit. I've heard some of the motions get kind of complicated, but for me, I think the spirit should just be the public and the highest bidder get the same amount of time to hunt on the unit. And those season dates should reflect what we're trying to accomplish in our management plan for that species. So there should be a reason why the dates are what they are, and everyone should have to hunt to them. And I know there's some heartburn about, does that devalue the tag? I would say, have you seen how hard it is to draw a sheep tag anywhere? So if you got enough money to buy one, I don't know if you're that turned off by, oh, my dates got shortened a little bit. The fact that you even had the opportunity to buy one's pretty rare experience in this world. So I know we're kind of switching back and forth, but what I would like to see is a proposal that basically says, hey, this is fine, except we need to go the opposite way. The conservation permits need to be brought back to whatever the public hunt dates are.
Yeah, Sunshine?
I just had a comment, which is, it gives me a little bit of heartburn if we ask every year for a variance, because I feel like, isn't this the point to like have these rules in place? And I feel like we shouldn't have these variances that come up over and over again. And I agree that the conservation tags sold at auction should be applied the same rules as the public hunters. And I feel like we should not use the variances over and over and over again.
So if this passes, this would be the plan, right? There wouldn't be a variance?
Correct. So in June at the board meeting, the request to do away with the variance concept and just have it built into the rule was passed. And so right now it is December 31st. So if the RAC would like to change that, then you could recommend to the board for us to open that rule again. We could come back and then change it to match the public hunt dates.
Tyler?
Does the sportsman's tag go to the end of the year?
Yes.
Yep. So conservation, the person who buys it, do we want to limit them from the end of the year? Sportsman tag goes to the end of the year. I don't necessarily think all the rest of the draw tags should go to the end of the year. They should stay the same.
So would the sportsman tag need to be?
The statewide tags wouldn't change under this concept.
Okay. So you'd still have those two tags that would go to December 31st.
Which sheep hunting kind of gets worse after November. But yeah.
Can I ask, does the division change what they do because they are considering that there might be a hunter there? Would you delay any of your projects because of that, or?
I think where we could, we would, if we have the option of, we can catch them, we can capture them in February instead of December or whatever, we could potentially do that. But our capture schedule is pretty tight. We've got a lot of animals to catch. We like to be efficient, and we don't want to be leapfrogging all over the state. We want to be efficient and do what we have to do. And so to an extent, we could be a little flexible, but we wouldn't want that to drive our management decisions. No.
Dustin Mitchell's wife hasn't seen enough of him and she needs to see him more.
That's probably true.
Well, and to me, I've participated in a lot of the captures, and I know that the best laid plans get changed because, weather dictates whether or not the helicopters can fly. So they could do their best to avoid it and may still end up having to do it during those hunts. So I just think it's better to move them, shorten them up so that we eliminate that potential. Any more discussion, or if not, we'll open it up for a motion.
I'll make a motion. Or try to. I'd like to make a motion that we accept the division's proposal as presented, except that we do not extend the sheep hunt dates to the end of the year, and instead make a recommendation to the board that they direct the division to make the conservation permit hunt dates line up with the public hunt dates.
You got all that, Chris?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Because you've got the unit down by St. George that does go to the end of the year to match up with Arizona. Does that mean they would be allowed to hunt that unit to the end of the year while the others end a little earlier?
I don't believe the Pine Valley, you're talking about the Pine
Yeah,
Valley?
didn't it match up with Arizona's or am I?
We try to
completely
match up
off
the
my rocker?
opening date to align with Arizona a little closer, but the end date is still November 10th.
Okay.
Is what we've traditionally done in the past.
Thank you. I was wrong.
Can I ask a question?
I think, actually, you may be right. Actually, as I'm thinking about it, I think we don't have anybody from the southern region here, do we? I'd have to look at old hunt dates, but you may be right. And that's kind of you're right. I mean, there are some hunts that there's exceptions to. We have agreements with other states or agreements with other agencies, and those could be slightly different. But for the most part, we've ended desert hunts on November 10th and Rocky hunts on November 30th. So.
Dana, do you have a question?
I did, because like currently people can ask for kind of the extension or the exception. Would that still be allowed if we say move the conservation hunt permit dates to align with public? Would we still allow a variance?
I think that's up to the board, and I think we hashed that out in a previous RAC, but my intention is that there is no variance requests anymore. That the hunt dates for the conservation permits line up with whatever it is for the public hunter hunt dates on that unit. And those are whatever they are for a million different reasons, but just that they line up to be the same. That's my intention with the motion, which we still don't have a second on if anyone wants to second it.
Right. So we do have a motion on the table. We good on the motion? Okay, do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Charles. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor, raise your hand. Scoot?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay, that moves us on to agenda item 9. Lindy, do you have some clarifications you want to go, or you just,
Nope,
we just
there's no,
open it up to questions?
shoot, yeah, go for it. Unless you want me to give a brief summary, you tell me.
The first time youth general season buck deer applicants receive one general deer season preference point. That's just a preference point. It's not necessarily a tag, so it won't affect this new antler point restriction on the Pine Valley that we just voted for.
No, so they'll receive a preference point, and it's just gonna help them have better draw odds. Just give them a leg up. It's not like a guarantee or anything. They just go in with 1 point and hopefully cut that year or two off of their wait time on the Pine Valley.
Okay, thanks for that. I just wanted to clarify.
Cash.
Hi, Lindy.
Hey.
I just want to give a shout out to Lindy. I really appreciated her calling me back, and I should have done more listening and less talking, but I appreciated the conversation a lot.
No, it's good.
I just had a question. I had discussed with Lindy maybe a different approach to this solution for the dedicated hunter, people acquiring points, but also getting tags. And I don't know, Lindy, I wanted to know if you had any follow-up with that, if the division or the attorneys have any stomach for what I had proposed.
Yeah, so what Cash and I talked about was kind of like, instead of allowing you to apply for one or the other, actually just doing it into one draw, one application where your first choice could be the dedicated hunter COR, and your second choice would be just for the normal unit for the rifle tag. So like, it's just all in one. There is some hesitation because what happens right now, there's 2 different point systems. And so in the previous, when, a species or a draw gets canceled, or, just like Cougar or the ML 300, those points reside. You still have those points. We don't take them away. You don't lose them. We've never merged them into anything else. And so it would set a new precedence if we all of a sudden combined. And if we did combine, there would be people, not just a few, there'd be a lot of people that would actually have more points than the max point allowed for general season deer. So that is a concern. If we did merge it into one and combine points, that these people that have, 20 points for each, they now have 40 preference points. Because, or it'd be 30 preference points or something like that. It was pretty high. There are people out there that just buy them and not apply for both categories. So that is a concern for us, because then it puts people way above and gives everyone that leg up. Another concern that we have about combining it into one is through the Mule Deer Committee. They wanted something to like where we could take action now. Combining it is a pretty complicated system when it comes to the draw that it would take time to actually implement. It's nothing that we could do for 2025. It would take several years to be put in place if we did that. So it is an option, but it's not something that we could do. And there is a lot of complications to it because it is a complex system and there are pros and cons. Something also to think about it when you do combine, you're kind of giving that false hope. When people apply for their first choice as dedicated hunter, their second choice as just the rifle tag, because they'll apply for the dedicated hunter, draw it on the rifle tag or archery tag, and they'll lose their points. So they'll never draw dedicated hunter. Essentially, they will never get their first choice because unless they never apply for a second through fifth choice. So essentially, it's the same thing that we're promoting, tonight, just in two different point systems. So, yeah,
So I think a follow-up question I have for you is what about the alternative idea that we would allow people to continue to apply for both, but if you draw, you do not gain a point in the other one? So essentially this would follow the intent that we did when we made it so that if you bought a leftover deer tag, you lost your point. So basically you either earn a point or you get to go hunting, but you don't get both.
Yep.
And so,
that's an option. Yeah. If that's something you guys felt, you can definitely make the recommendation and we could look to see how that would play out. But yeah, that is out there as well.
And I know we're not in comment period. I guess for me, the reason I asked the question and I called Lindy about it is I can understand why combining point systems is a complicated procedure. It maybe needs more time, but maybe there's an intermediate step between what's being proposed and where we're currently at that we can maybe have a compromise here.
So I have a question, Lindy. Rather than combine them, is it possible to give them the choice to put in? But so say I choose to put in for dedicated hunter and I have 5 points. That's the points that I get. They still have points for both, but they can't, like he says, they can't put in for one and get a point for another.
Yeah.
You get one option and those are the points. So if I have 5 points here and I have 10 points here, if I put in for this as my choice, those are the points that are used. Is that an option? Is that convoluted so bad or what?
It's an option. It is, but it's nothing that we could actually implement for this season, next hunting season, just because of the programming and everything. And it would take time that we're not, able to do with that quick of a turnaround, because we're already programming the application right now. But it is an option to move, in the future years. And so if that's something you guys wanted to do, we could look into it, make the recommendation, but not for the 2025 season, unfortunately.
How many points does it usually take to get into the dedicated hunter program? I'm not a dedicated hunter. I don't know.
Some units like in the southern region, it takes around 5, maybe 6 on very select, very small portion. A lot of them are 1 to 2. Some dedicated hunter units are actually easier to draw out for than in the regular draw. So it just depends on what, and the year too, because of how many are leaving the program is how many we can bring in. So there's so many variables to that question, but yeah.
Any other questions for Lindy? Steve?
Yeah, I think you said this, so I apologize in your program, but how many first year hunter applications are there?
I think I said 3,400 this year. I'm pulling up the number just to make sure. It's been minutes since I've looked at it. Yeah, it was around 3,400 for this year. It varies between, each year, but that was about the average. But this year in 2024, we had 3,400 new youth.
So is there any thought of even just giving every first year hunter a tag?
The Mule Deer Committee did think about that, and that was talked about, but they weighed the pros and cons to it. All of a sudden, all the first-time youth applicants receive a tag. They could jump to a different unit, jump to a different weapon type, cause huge numbers and other units to go up because they know they're guaranteed for that unit and that weapon type. And so the harvest was taken into account, overcrowding on certain units or permits not being taken for the regular. But yeah, it was talked about because that was their end goal. They wanted to get the youth out there, but they also didn't want to affect everyone else as much as possible.
Tyler?
Will you cover the part where you discussed taking any leftover tags, converting them to rifle tags, then giving them to youth, and then
The most
Yes.
confusing part of the presentation? Okay, so right now we have a 20% allocation that we give to the youth of the general season tags. And then within that 20% allocation, we divide it to 60-20-20. The normal 60% any legal weapon, 20 archery, 20 muzzleloader. Right now, we see that most of our youth apply for the any legal weapon tag, and that's because they get to hunt all 3 seasons, right? So why would you not? However, there are youth out there that still apply for archery and muzzleloader. On a lot of our units, we actually don't have enough applicants for the archery and muzzleloader tags just because it's a lesser weapon, it's harder to get into. So what we're proposing is taking that unutilized quota by unit, and then after the first round is done, we convert those permits into any legal weapon tag for that unit. And then rerun the youth out, draw again with the youth that were not successful the first time, and see if we can give any of those permits more to the youth. And then go to the regular round with the adults. So it's adding like a third draw for the youth, essentially.
So are these already the allocated 20% of the youth tags?
Yes.
They just weren't taken by the youth.
Correct. Yeah, it's just the 20%. And then so currently right now, if they aren't taken by the youth, they go into the regular round, and the adults and the youth that did not draw would go for those permits again. But what was proposed through the Mule Deer Committee is saying, hey, let's try to give that 20% as much as possible to the youth. Essentially, it was such a smaller number. Let's see if we can get those youth that did apply for any legal weapon one more time to see if they would.
So essentially, we're just reallocating them from a primitive weapon to the rifle, still going back to the youth.
Yes. Yep.
That help?
Yes. How many tags are we talking total? Like, you don't have to give a unit, but like, what would we be looking at?
Yeah, let me pull up my
Potentially.
spreadsheet real quick.
Could you game the system and just all youth put in rifle, and then maybe you end up with a rifle tag anyways in the third go? So
Yes and
could they
no.
potentially game it where everyone just does rifle because maybe in the third round, that's what you get?
And that's a
Maybe.
definitely hypothetical reason, but why, if your kids will, I've never applied my kids for any legal weapon tag because I know my kid's going to draw out for muzzleloader. We hunt muzzleloaders in our house. And so I know they've got better chances of drawing that tag. So even with this, I still wouldn't do it. But yeah, it is a hypothetical reason, but yeah, I try to teach my kids to get out there and try to hunt. And here's the best way to do that is by going to that muzzleloader tag.
Coming back to sorry, just building off that quick. He asked how many youth tags are we talking, weren't we saying, isn't it like 2,800? Is that what you
Yeah,
had in your presentation?
Yeah, I was
There's-
just pulling it up.
Yeah, I think the presentation, Lindy will get a
It was
exact
like
number.
2,800 for this
Yeah,
year. Yep.
Yeah, so there's 2,800 tags that the youth statewide that the youth left on the table,
Yeah,
and they're looking to reallocate them.
just as any legal weapon.
They would stay in that unit. They
Yes.
wouldn't get
Yeah,
moved around.
if it's on LaSalle's, it would stay on LaSalle's. It would not go to San Juan or anything like that. It would stay on that unit.
And I think about talking about the gaming, the system, I think our draw rate for our youth last year was 45%. So even if you threw 2,800 tags over there and everyone wanted to apply for rifle, everyone's still not getting a tag.
No. No. So.
Any other questions? Any questions from the public? We have any online comments on this one?
Yeah, we had 5 people respond to the survey question. 20% somewhat agreed, 20% somewhat disagreed, and 60% strongly disagreed. And some of the comments were, all Utah resident youth should be able to draw a deer tag. If you're going to limit applications to putting in for either dedicated hunter or general, they should be able to combine the points they have. Don't sell the 2,000 remaining tags that the youth don't draw. Save some deer. If the youth tags are not getting allocated to archery, don't give them to the rifle hunts. This allows them to hunt all 3 hunts.
Okay, we'll go to public comments. We have 2 comment cards, Kevin and then Troy.
Kevin Norman representing SFW. We had our fulfillment committee meeting and we support this with the exception of they wanted to keep the dedicated and the general as the way it is, being able to draw or apply for both of those. So that's our stance. Thank you.
Troy Justinson, Mule Deer Committee. Going into this committee, there's probably one thing I wanted most, and that was to do the same thing we did with the elk, is put a tag in each kid's hand. I mean, we looked at it any way possible. It's important to get our youth out there, but by doing so, it affected so many different people that there's just no way possible for us to do it. So on behalf of myself, I support the recommendation that has come forth from the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Troy. Okay, we'll open it up back up for RAC discussion. Any comments?
Can I actually ask one more question?
No, it's comments.
I know.
Go ahead.
I know.
I like that response.
Yeah, maybe she doesn't have to respond, right? You can ask. Does the division have any I know I already said we're only talking about 2,800 tags, but does the division have any concerns about a shift in success rates? Because you're taking archery permits and muzzleloader permits that you're kind of banking on have a lower success rate, and you're turning them into rifle tags. Plus, for a youth, multi-season tags, right? So is there any concern with that, with success rates on the unit and the biology?
From the discussion that we had at the Mule Deer Committee, our biologists did not have the concern since it was a lower number. Dax can correct me if I'm wrong, but they talked about that in the committee, and that lower number was not a concern.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I guess I have a couple comments, but maybe I'll try to break them up so I don't drag everyone down. I very much appreciate the recommendations that have been coming forward for the youth. I have children that are growing up, and I already love taking them out hunting with me so much, and I can't wait for them to have the opportunity to be there. And so I think it's important. I was a youth once, and I felt super lucky for the opportunities that I had. So I'd like to see that continued on. I do get heartburn though when I read repeated comment, whether it's submitted to the RAC or on social media, where we just clamor and saying the youth are not getting an opportunity to hunt in this state. And that just turns my stomach because I just don't see it that way. It seems to me that we say our youth will never get to hunt, they'll never get into the sport. And I feel like what you mean to say is, if my youth doesn't ever get to deer hunt on the unit I grew up on, they'll never learn to hunt. That's a totally different conversation. And it sounds like you're being really nitpicky. So I think we're trying to do a good job as a division. I think I've seen Lindy give some presentations that are really good that talk about the enormous amount of opportunity for youth hunters to big game hunt in this state every year, not to mention every other upland and waterfowl opportunity that we have. And so I'm a little concerned with some of these recommendations and what the overall effects that they might be. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it's really hard for me to stomach when someone says my youth doesn't have an opportunity to hunt in this state. I just don't see it.
Any other comments? Go ahead.
I guess I'm going again. I would really like to see something happen different for the dedicated here. The dedicated permit is a general season deer permit, and we're acting like it's something other than that. So for our other multi-season tags, like we have on limited entry elk, limited entry deer, we don't have a separate point system for those. It's a hunt choice. Now, it's been made clear tonight that we probably can't make dedicated a hunt choice, but somewhere along the line, we decided to create its own point of pools, and now we're left with this mess. And there's some concern that 10% of our general season deer hunters are double dipping on the system. And I guess that's the case when it comes to points, but when it comes to tags, the tags are the same. I don't get 2 buck tags. Can't. I only get 1 buck tag. So that's my opportunity to go out and hunt. And I feel like what we're saying is, okay, well, we're going to force you to choose this route to get a buck tag or this route to get a buck tag, which we do all the time. If there's something that's really different about those tags. I understand that dedicated is a multi-season permit and I'm guaranteed it for multi-years, but I also pay more money and give service hours for that opportunity. And now what you're saying is, even though you're going to give more, we're also going to shove you into a draw that is way more difficult to predict when you're going to draw a permit. And I just don't know that that's fair to our dedicated hunters that are putting in a lot of volunteer hours across the state. So I think what I would like to see is either this proposal be accepted except for that part, or maybe there's a compromise here where I appreciate that people say you should either get a tag or you should get points, but you shouldn't get both. Okay, well, let's direct the division to figure out a way to do that, where if I draw a dedicated deer permit, I don't gain a general season buck permit, or if I draw a general season buck permit, I don't get a dedicated point that year. I think we can say, yeah, you get a tag or you get points, but you don't get both. And I feel like that's a spirit message that we used before when we changed, you lost your points when you bought a leftover tag. And I feel like we can carry that message on here without shoving a demographic that gives a lot of volunteer hours in the state into one particular draw.
Charles.
I kind of see what you're saying there. I really like the dedicated hunter program when the dedicated hunters are putting in the volunteer hours. I think giving them the two opportunities to draw points, and then also the opportunity to buy all their hours, which is a separate discussion, but I guess I'm talking about it now, seems to not be the best way to do it. But the dedicated hunter program, I think, is a great program that we have in the state, and those that put in their volunteer hours should be rewarded in ways we can do that. And I think part of the reason we don't have so many volunteer projects for them is at the fault of the DWR and federal agencies that haven't put out enough projects for them. So looking for more opportunities for those guys, I think, is great. We need to look at that.
I guess just kind of to Charles's point, I feel like the dedicated hunters who put in the hours are rewarded because they're the ones who get the tag. They draw the tag. They don't have to do the hours unless they draw the tag. So kind of 2 ways to look at that. No more comments. We'll open it up for a motion. You're on a roll.
All right. I'd like to make a motion. I'll say it with more enthusiasm. I would like to make a motion. Okay, there you go. That we accept the division's presentation as it was proposed, except that we do not change the dedicated hunter general season hunt application, and instead direct the division to come up with a different alternative to help reduce point creep.
So do you want to word that such? You stated it better when you were talking about it.
You want me to do the one or the
well,
other? Would you
yeah,
prefer that?
yeah,
You're
yeah, I
asking me to
guess-
amend my motion? I'd be happy.
So
I'd be happy to.
I think if that's what
Yeah.
you're looking
It
for,
is, yeah.
it needs to be in the motion that that's what we're asking them to do.
Okay, I agree. How about this? I'll amend my motion. Thank you, Eric. I will, can we accept the division's proposal as presented, except we do not accept the dedicated hunter portion of the proposal, and instead have the division figure out a way where a applicant either earns a tag or a point, but not both. Does that sound good?
That sounds good to me.
Okay.
You get all that, Chris?
Earn a point or get a tag, but not both.
Yep, correct. Okay, we have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Tyler. Any discussion on the motion?
Yeah, it's not. The division is saying, and I guess you could say they are, but they're going about it in a different way, right? They're going about it in the way, well, how we'll either get you a point or get you a tag is we'll shove you into one draw or the other. And what I'm proposing is you can still apply for both draws, but you still only get a point. You either get, we could say point/points or a tag, but you don't get both. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
So let me ask, because when we talked, I'm not sure I understood what you're saying, because if you're still allowing them to apply for both, aren't you essentially giving them two chances?
You are giving them two chances, but you're not giving them a point and a tag. All right.
Okay,
Yeah.
that helps clarify. Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor of the motion, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Scoot. He's raised his hand. That's 5. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Good luck.
He's been waiting for this the whole meeting.
I thought I was gonna get through this whole thing without doing that. I like the idea of not giving a point and a tag. Not sure if that's the best way to go about it or not, but I think it's worth looking into, so I will vote yes in support of that motion. Okay, Chad, before you get up, we're down to our last agenda item. It's an important one. I don't want it to be rushed through because we're all sitting here squirming because we got to go to the restroom. So we're going to take a 7-minute break and we'll come back and finish up.
The restrooms are outside in the front. Good idea.
Yeah, the restrooms are outside in the front. Okay, let's take our seats and get going again.
We got to vote and use your gavel tonight.
Yeah. Come on, Director, sit down. Okay, Salt Lake, we're ready to start again.
We are on the record. Thank you.
Are we back?
We are back.
Okay, we're down to our last agenda item, item 10, CWMU renewals. Chad, he's in the hot seat now. Any clarifications you'd like to make before we open it up to questions?
I just hope I can function this early in the evening. Hopefully, I'm not quite this early, but no, I don't really have any clarifications, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I think the presentation was pretty straightforward.
Okay, open it up to questions from the RAC.
I just had a question about what the rule is about operating a CWMU when you're convicted of a wildlife violation.
Yeah, so if you're currently serving time, then it's a for sure, like, we're not gonna have you be part of the CWMU. We've kind of adopted when we changed the CWMU rule this last year, we adopted the revocation rules. So depending on how serious it was during that time frame, then you wouldn't operate. Once it gets outside of that time frame, it's not a guarantee that you are able to operate it at that time. So we still need to consider previous wildlife violations and I guess have that discussion if we feel like there's been enough time that's passed that to give somebody another chance. Because we also don't want to bar somebody for life because they have a wildlife violation.
And what's that time frame?
For a misdemeanor, you want all of them? You're testing my memory. I used to be in law enforcement and I used to know these pretty good, but I think it's 3 years for misdemeanor B, 5 for an A, and 7 for a felony. I'm looking at you, JD. Is that right for revocation?
Yeah, and then a little bit of variance on that depending on the smash.
Yeah, so trophy, like I think you can double it if it's a trophy animal.
Charles?
Are we allowed to talk about what wildlife violations we're looking at for this CWMU?
I think that's a fair question, and I'm going to punt that one because Kyle's been on every one of these racks, and he hasn't been able to talk yet. So Kyle Maynard, our attorney's online, and I'll let him answer that.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Good try, Chad. So, I mean, if the question is, are we allowed to talk about it? Yeah, if I understand, Mr. Eichenauer is with us tonight, if he's willing to talk about that. I think that the rule requires us to consider these violations and on a renewal. So to some degree, we have to consider it. Yeah.
So I believe you got the letter that Mr. Eichenauer sent out. He spoke about that. He explained what the violation was in the letter. So Darren?
So is that the sole reason for denial or was there some other reason?
In the presentation, we listed that. So that was one of the reasons of past conviction. And then we met with him. All of this kind of happened really last minute. So the application came under the old landowners because they still own the land. So it wasn't until I think the last day of September, beginning of October that the sale happened. At that point is when we found out about the previous charges. So we went and talked to him about that. And just in those conversations, we felt more comfortable of not recommending renewal at that time, but wanted a little bit more time to make sure that our management ideals aligned a little bit more closely and that we could truly have a relationship that we could be cooperative and work together.
So that brings up a question for me, Chad. How do we go about that if they're not in a CWMU program? How do you know if he's going to work with us or, seems to me like, is it an option? This is a 3-year renewal, right?
Yeah.
Is it an option to have a variance to where it's a 1 year, basically a probation, so to speak? Because, it seems, I guess I just don't understand how we know that, how we figure out if the relationship's going to work if that CWMU is not in the program.
Yeah, I don't think we have a way. CWMUs can be put on probation, so they can. Once a COR is issued, it's a lot more difficult to revoke that COR. So yeah, there is potential to do something like that, but we would issue a 3-year COR. We don't have a mechanism to just do a 1-year COR. You could do it putting them on probation. Our thoughts were, in this case, it's on a limited entry unit. There's huge incentives for him to work with us to be able to get those tags on this unit. We asked for cow harvest on that one, and we would still ask for that and see if he would work with us to get them through private land onlys, or if we give him mitigation tags, to see if he's willing to do that. See how much trust we have of working together on us being on the ranch. Just some of those other things, just saying, letting him know up front, this is what we're looking for. This is where we won't need assurances. And if we can get those assurances over time, then potentially our recommendation could change for it to be renewed. And Kyle, if I messed anything up.
Kyle, you have your
No, you did
comment?
good, Chad. I could just clarify the probation question a little bit. So we did look at that and consider it. And in the rule, probation status is limited. So it requires you basically to report to the CWMU Advisory Committee and create a corrective action plan. But the rule doesn't give us any of the latitude we felt like to change the term of the COR. So we kind of feel like we're bound by the term and the tag allocation amounts, which were 2 ideas that we battered around with Mr. Eichenauer. And so I think in talking about how do we build that relationship if he's not part of the program, part of it was just as a new landowner in the state with this history, is just do you know the laws of the state? Are we going to find ourselves having to deal with any other future violations down the road, and just building that relationship and trust there.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is it's not an option to do some sort of a variance that makes it a probation type COR where it could be revoked in 1 year depending on circumstances. Is that accurate, or is that an option?
I guess to give a half answer is there's no way for us to provide a 1-year COR. The CORs can be terminated and revoked, and that could happen at any time during the 3-year period, but we couldn't go into it saying, well, it's going to be 1 year and we'll see what happens.
And I guess as long as that option is there, and as long as it's upfront that it is a probationary thing, and it was agreed upon that if there wasn't the relationship and the compliance that is required, that it would be revoked. I guess that's, I don't know. I just struggle with how we learn or understand if that relationship's going to work without them being in the program. So if you guys have got plans or other things like that, I'd love to hear what they are, because That's what I'm asking, I guess.
Yeah, and so a lot of this, and I'll be pretty candid here, is like, we didn't know him until the end of till October. And from our first meeting, I think he'd even say that one didn't go super good between the two of us. But since that point in time till now, like with being able to communicate with each other, talk to each other, the relationship's already building. Like I feel like I've seen progress and change. So I think with just it'd be one that we'd for sure focus on. We'd try to be on his ranch. We'd try to have that communication. We'd try to build that trust rather than, I mean, if I could go back in time, I wish we would have known who this was back in June or July, and we could have started that relationship at that time. And maybe our recommendation even today would have been different if that was the case. But we can't go back in time. We met him when we met him, and the first meeting, first and only face-to-face meeting didn't go so well. And we were just up against it of having to make a recommendation, and that's where we had to follow on that recommendation at that time. And I would say, you guys can make your recommendation. Ultimately, the wildlife board makes the decision, but yeah, that's the division's recommendation at this time.
Fair enough. Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, my just kind of follow-up comment to that is the division has relationships with a lot of landowners who aren't in the CWMU program, and they work well with some and maybe not as well with others. Like, I mean, there's still things that are going to come up. It's not like they only know about the landowners that are in this program.
Okay. Any other questions for Chad?
I just had a question. Are there other CWMU operators that have wildlife violations?
So since I've been put in, so 5 years, I've been in for 5 years, we have done a pretty good job of looking at them. And so if some had them in the past that were already operators, I can't guarantee you on those, but anybody that's been new hasn't had a wildlife violation. So.
I got a question. This particular CWMU is a big landowner on this unit with a lot of animals that move into that, find refuge in that. If this isn't approved, what do we expect pressure wise? Are all these animals going to move and sit there? I know that was a big thing we talked about at the elk committee, is finding these places with basically safe harbor for these elk and them not moving off of these units. Is that going to be an issue on this unit?
So yeah, landowners have the ability to decide who hunts and how much. So they could allow hunters to come on. They could charge trespass for hunters to come on. Like I said, if we need cow harvest, we would probably ask them either through private land only or mitigation tags to harvest some cow elk for us. But yeah, a lot of that would be determined by the landowner. And I would say if we're needing harvest off of that, that would be part of what we'd base off of, like if we can have a cooperative relationship going forward. If it's something where we felt like, hey, we need some harvest here, and the landowner's like, I'm out, like I'm not in the program, you can't make me, then we're probably going to be hesitant for longer about recommending them in the program. Or, if it's like, hey, we need this to help manage the herd, and he's all over it, then yeah, that makes us say, yeah, this could be a good relationship going forward. So I think that's how we'd make a lot of those determinations and just try to work with them.
Yes.
I'm going to do a hard topic turn. We can come back if you want, but a hard topic turn. A couple of questions. Chad, for the Old Woman Plateau, isn't that one up for renewal on this one? I believe I saw it listed out, or is it not?
There's 130 CWMUs, and most of them were last year, and I don't have them all memorized for this year. I can look real quick. Let me see.
If it makes you feel better, I was scrolling through the 132 and I wasn't like, I don't know.
Yeah, there gets to be a lot. So let's see. No, I don't see it on my list.
Okay, I'll wait for tags to complain on that one.
Okay.
Okay. I just have concerns with the old woman, and making sure that the public's getting a fair shake there with a CWMU that they're split so far on where they're at. They already have like 1,200 acres on that one. I'm a little concerned. So that's why I wanted to ask about it. I guess another question I have for you is, there were a couple comments about Junction Valley not hitting their harvest on limited entry bowls. Can you speak to the division's position on that? Or
Yeah,
is that
yeah.
still a high quality hunt for our public hunters or?
Yeah.
So I guess, what are our satisfaction rates? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so 2023 was a rough year like that for everybody up in that country. So they didn't harvest in 2023. Before making this recommendation for 2 additional bull tags, we looked back at the public hunter specifically because the private tags and vouchers they get, not all of them always have the goal of harvesting. So we're not as concerned about that, but we are really concerned that the public has a good hunt and a good opportunity and good satisfaction ratings. And we looked back to 2017 and there was good harvest and satisfaction ratings. So 2023 was really the odd year. Like it just wasn't a good year. I've spoken with that operator even this year, and he said they had a good year this year. So yeah, 2023, I think that was a fair comment that was made, and it was the anomaly.
Okay. Another question I have for you. We have a lot of our general season deer units that are gonna maybe get a new deer management plan that's gonna change the buck to doe ratios. And there's some concern, especially down on the San Juan unit, that a lot of the best deer habitat there is wrapped up in the CWMU program, which is a good thing. And our CWMUs generally manage for higher buck to doe ratios because they're a limited entry unit. But there's just concern that their counts on the CWMUs are going towards the counts on the public land. And I don't know can you speak to that at all? I know it's more of a biology question, but what influence are our CWMUs having on our general season tag allocations?
Yeah, our biologist is here, so I'm gonna let them handle that one.
Yeah, good question. It comes up every year too. I'm going to give you the same answer that I give every year. So especially on Spring Creek Dodge, that's where most people are talking about. It's right at the base of the mountain. Those deer migrate through there. When it's classification time, you've got deer from the mountain that are on there. You've also got deer that have lived on the CWMU, depending on the snow year or whatever, that are moving down further onto public land, nowhere near the CWMU. So you've got that going on. Also, when we do our recommendations, we take those numbers as a total for a buck deer ratio, but we also look at the winter range that's off of the CWMUs that don't attach to them at all. And we're still within the parameters of our buck to doe ratio every year. They've had some local groups that don't trust our numbers that have went, did their own classification also, and it comes out higher than what we usually have. So that's the answer I have for you.
Good answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Dustin. Any other questions for Chad?
I had one. I apologize. I should have wrote this down. One of the first, I don't know, in your when you were sharing the first area, I don't know if it was a northern or northeastern, there was a new one that had a significant amount of new acreage, but no changes in the tags. And I guess I just want to understand how that works. I guess I'm looking at it from a perspective, if the public are wanting to access tags, is it just the landowner saying we don't want to harvest any animals and so we're happy with where we're at, even though we've got a ton more acres? Or does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, it does. I think that's Fort Ranch.
Yeah.
I show on here 16,000 more acres on it.
Right, that's exactly the one. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's probably a habitat thing more than on anything, honestly. So it is a lot of acres and it's not the highest quality of habitat. So even though it's a lot of acres, we're not adding a ton of extra deer there. So yeah, it probably is just lack of resource, even though it's a lot more acres.
Cash?
Chad, with the change in the elk management plan up on the box elder unit, has there been much interest in more elk CWMUs on the box elder unit?
I wish the biologist was here because I know I had conversations with guys up there about potentially joining. We're at a little bit of an interesting spot with general season elk that CWMUs are debating whether it's worth it being in there. And I think if I remember right, the ones that were considering it thought, let's try it before we put it in a CWMU and see how it works for them. So yeah, I think potentially we will see some potentially in the future, but I don't think they have applied as of yet.
Any other questions from the RAC? Okay, we'll open it up to questions from the public. No questions from the public. Any public comments?
Yeah, we had 7 people respond to the survey question. 14% somewhat agreed, 29% neither agreed or disagreed, and 57% strongly disagreed. We had 3 or 4 comments. The former owner of the JB Ranch expressed support and confidence for the new owner and said they deserve a chance to perform even on a trial basis. Another comment supported the JB Ranch renewal. The ranch has a history of nonprofit hunt work and they help manage cow elk hunts. And then the new owner of the JB Ranch wrote a letter which you all received. They're committed to providing high quality experience for public hunters and adhering to the ranch's high standards and all rules and regulations applicable to CWMUs. They're committed to be an exceptional partner. And the last comment was about the Junction Valley CWMU. It was the comment was that they should not be awarded an extra bull tag when their satisfaction harvest scores are relatively low.
Okay, we will go to public comments. Maybe. We'll start with Steve Deering. He'll be followed by Tony Gallagly. Did I say that right?
Good evening. My name is Steve Deering. I'm an attorney. I represented Robert Eichenauer when he purchased JB Ranch. And I just want to share just a couple experiences I had during that process. Robert found me somehow, but he had hired me after he signed the purchase agreement, didn't care to hire an attorney during that process. Through his broker and himself, he approached the former owner. It wasn't on the market. He just loved JB Ranch so much that he made an offer, said, I would really love for this to be my ranch. And the owner accepted that unsolicited offer. During that process, he kept telling me, show me the red flags, but just know that I'm going to buy this thing, which he did. We closed near the end of September, as has been mentioned. And since then, he's been operating under the CWMU. And so I know we're talking about this trial period of how do we get to know Mr. Robert Eichenauer. He's been doing it for 2 months already. But on top of that, he also has a 40-year career of being an operator, both for a commercial ranch and for recreational ranches as well. Mr. Eichenauer has all the qualifications, but he's got that felony that happened. It was 18 years ago that it did actually happen. And that should go into the calculation or the calculus and determination of how persuasive is that felony in light of all the evidence that came after. I mean, to give it some context, when that felony happened in 2006, there were no such thing as iPhones. Like, it was a long time ago. And so now he's been operating for 18 years and has abided by all rules. This is an important distinction. It was a federal felony. It wasn't a state felony. So the state of Texas, state of New Mexico, state of Colorado, they have all very much appreciated Mr. Eichenauer as an operator of the various ranches that he's owned and operated in those areas. In one more statement, we're talking about a trial period, a probationary period. I would agree that there's nothing in the rules that say we can bring on an operator for a probationary period, but not like that. The division, the wildlife board certainly has authority once the certificate is issued to suspend it, to put them on probation. Like, it's just the inverse of the same thing. So the certificate's issued for 3 years. And if there are any violations, which there won't be, but if there are, you have the authority to put him on probation, revoke it, whatever it might be, in order to take away that designation. We would appreciate it if you make the recommendation for his application for renewal to be approved. Thanks.
Thank you. Tony?
After hearing some of that other stuff, it mixes up my mind a little bit. But I'm Tony Gallagher. I was the operator on the JB Ranch for the last 11 years. I did some guiding 12 years ago also on the ranch. I manage the ranch, pretty much do everything on the ranch. There are several people in this crowd that actually hunt on the ranch, and their family does. With my brother who owns the ranch, who owned it before Robert bought it, our philosophy was, without the public hunter, there won't be any private hunting. We wouldn't get bull tags, we wouldn't get buck tags. And we don't hardly shoot any bucks because they're just not really big. So with that, and I don't know how familiar you are with the JB Ranch CWMU. We were CWMU of the year last year. We had 100% on all of our public hunters. This year, I think we have 35 cow tags, and between private and public, and 4 people weren't successful. 2 had opportunities to miss shots. 1 didn't show up, and another one mistook a spike for a cow, and that one didn't end up well. So, but otherwise, we do a good job. In the last 3 years, we've got 4.9 or 5 satisfaction rates. And Robert has been around when I bring hunters back, and he's congratulatory to them. He's happy they're getting their animals, and I think I got a good feeling he wants to continue. We guide everybody. We don't charge for guiding public hunters. It benefits us and maintains the ethics of the hunt. And hopefully everybody can appreciate that. I can't imagine, with the CWMU, you develop a management plan, and I can't imagine that we can't come up with something between the DNR and Robert that isn't, successful. I think, the one meeting, and Chad had mentioned, that was a few days before the closing. We closed on September 30th, and we had no idea we were going to sell it this year. So that was interesting in and of itself. But one meeting, and there wasn't really a discussion about management. It was more, I think, what did Robert have to say? And Robert comes from a different background with a private ranch and selling tags and that. And we've never sold them. I come from a family of 10 kids. There were always family that wanted to hunt on the ranch. My brother was generous. We've done a lot with the DNR, all different aspects of it. We've got about 190 acres of aspen projects done, 600 acres of mastication of scrub oak, and we work well with them. We had discussion with the fuels management person from DNR down in Moab, and Robert's talked about doing some thinning on ponderosas and doing some understory burning and improving habitat that way, and he's open to more. The fuels management guy said we're looking at getting more funding. He said we have to start finding funding to do these projects. We open up Pace Lake on the ranch to the fire people down at DNR. They have permission to dip. As soon as they have a fire, they're supposed to contact me. If they can't, start dipping. We work with them. We've done bears, trapping bears and collaring bears up there. We try to work hard with DNR. I can only expect that Robert will do the same. He bought the ranch to hunt, and we talked a lot about the CWMU program prior to him buying it, and it's a good program. We love it. We love serving the public, and I think Robert will continue to do the same. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And last comment is Mr. Eichenauer.
I'm not a very good speaker. I'm nervous as hell, but I'll do it anyway. My name is Robert Eichenauer. I am the new owner of the JB Ranch in the LaSalle Mountains, which has been in the CWMU program for many years and has constantly been rated as top CWMU in the program. And this year was, as you know, has been awarded by CWMU of the year. I previously have operated high fence ranch in Texas known as the Circle E for nearly 40 years with whitetail and had the largest elk herd in the state of Texas. Due to my 2006 conviction for illegally transporting wildlife, white-tailed deer in general, into the state of Texas, the division proposal is to deny the JB Ranch from entering the CWMU program this year. As I have served my sentence of 18 months and learned my mistakes, I hope the division will allow me to stay in the program with the same cooperation as the previous owners and be able to continue the legacy of the JB Ranch and its management of deer and elk herds in the LaSalle Mountains. I look forward to cooperating with the DWR biologist and will strictly adhere to all the rules and laws associated with the Utah wildlife and the CWMU program, and want to be a good steward of the land and do more to promote healthy herds in the LaSalle Mountains. The JB Ranch has been a major role in helping with the management of the LaSalle deer and elk herds, and I respectfully request that you vote the JB Ranch to remain in the CWMU program. I would not be opposed to being placed on probation and allow the division to monitor how they monitor the ranch more closely. And again, if they have a problem with me in the first year, 8 months, 3 months, 5 months, I'll gladly sign a contract that I'll even drop out of the program on my own. I'd like this to work. I'm a very good steward of the property. I've owned property in Colorado, New Mexico, large hunting operations, and state of Texas. I own 3,000 acres under high fence and kill 300 elk bulls a year. I know how to raise an elk, know a lot of things about an elk, but that's irrelevant. I'll do whatever the state wants me to do and to keep the CWMU and try to keep the public coming in and having the 100% kill ratio that is currently having or very close to having. And if you got any questions, please feel free because I'm nervous as hell, but I'll answer them.
Thank you for your comments. I do have one question for you. Will Tony be staying on as the operator?
I've begged him and begged him and begged him, and he's got to go to work for his brother down at the Motherwell, and I will talk to him again. But yes, I have begged the man.
Understand.
Will you stay? That's in front of 30 people.
Not to put you on the spot,
Yeah,
Tony,
not to
but
put you on the spot. I got a proposal for him, but I don't want to propose it in here.
well, thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Okay, that was our last public comment on this item. We'll open it up now for RAC discussion.
I guess I just wanted to say thank you for coming and sharing because I always tell my students about ethics a lot and people make mistakes. And I think it's great to like own up to them and talk about them because that's better than the alternative.
Charles?
I've hunted a lot on the edge of JB's ranch and looked jealously upon the herds of elk that sit just over the fence line. But I would hate to see the ranch leave this program because of indiscretions in the past. We all make mistakes and things happen. We learn from those mistakes, and once we serve our time to the public, which it sounds like we have in this case, maybe it's time to reconsider and look at continuing this relationship we've had with the ranch, even if it's under a different owner. It's a great piece of property, holds a lot of elk. It's got a lot of habitat that I think helps that unit out. And that's, I guess, my comments on it.
Thanks, Charles. Any other comments?
Chad, I was, with this compressed timeline, did the CWMU Advisory Committee get to give any kind of recommendation on this particular renewal?
No, that the application came in, is due this year by the very latest August 31st. And so, I mean, I had to do my recommendations by mid-October, and we didn't talk to Robert till beginning of October. So yeah, we didn't, there was not time to go through there. The renewal has to happen now, this next board meeting.
Thank you.
There was no learning curve from him to us, to I, or any learning curve from I to him.
Kirk, you have a comment?
Yeah, for me, the previous conviction, I mean, if that's changed, that's a long time ago. I'm not too worried about that. The concern that the first meeting didn't go well, and I don't know if because the lawyers are here, we can't talk about things specifically. That's typically, in my experience, what happens. But that's what's more concerning to me is that, like, what happened there, and are we just saying what we need to say right now to get this through? I guess that's my biggest concern, speaking for myself, is like, yeah, are we just, do we realize, oh.
Well, I was asking about feed because I come from a high fence operation. Again, we killed.
Yeah, sorry.
I come from a high fence operation, and as soon as we met them, Ian and Dustin, and one of their comments was that, well, we don't like high fences, or we're not going to put up with a high fence. Well, that's where I come from, and we used to feed elk. We used to put mineral out for elk. There's a lot of things how to grow antlers on elk, and I went to school to learn how to grow an elk, and grew elk for 40 years. When I come here, I had no idea that I couldn't feed. I had no idea I couldn't set up protein feeders. I had no idea that I could set out mineral blocks all winter long for them. And I think that's what got me in trouble. I just truly do, because I was asking the wrong questions and not knowing that I shouldn't even be asking those questions. Because here it's against the law to feed. It's against the law to set out mineral. I've been explaining that too since, but the day of that, we never talked about that at all, did we?
I think he's correct. Like he's phrasing that right. Like we had a lot of those conversations, and a lot of just the practices that he's managed wildlife in other states is just significantly different than what we did here. And like I said, we had one meeting to discuss it. We didn't have a lot of time to go into details. So that was our meeting. We talked about those different things, coupled with the previous violation. We knew it had been a long time ago. And that's why we wanted to go down and see like where he was at on that, and if we could work through things, and just the different management that he's done. And I will say Robert at that time did say like that he would abide by what we said, but it was more your comment of like, that's what he's saying, is that to get the CWMU, like we just didn't know him well enough, and there wasn't enough time to have those conversations and make a recommendation to the Wildlife Board and to the RACs. So that's where we ended up with our recommendation. But it was what he's saying, those were our concerns, was just a lot of different management practices. It's a CWD positive area. So when we're talking about feeding, mineral blocks, all of that, it's also congregating animals, and it just gave us pause that we wanted to have a little bit more time to see how it would progress before we made that recommendation in the limited amount of time we
On
had.
my place in Texas, we did 4,000 CWD tests with brainstems on our own. And if we want to learn the CWD, what the percentage of CWD is here in the LaSalle's, I'll be glad to pull 35 brain stems out of each cow that we pull, out of the 8 bulls that we kill. That's only a $7 test. And I'll be glad to do that. If there's a herd of 400, we do 40 tests, 10% of the herd, if the 0 come up negative, or if the all come up negative, we don't have much of a problem there in the LaSalle's, at least in that general area of the JB. There's a lot of things that I can do, that we can do, we can work together. But
Mr. Eichenauer, I have a question for you. Something you said about the high fence. Is there any plans whatsoever?
no, sir.
For high fence on the
I'm
JB
68
ranch?
years old, and I had a place in Mora, New Mexico. It was 6,000 acres. It burned to the ground through the Hermit Peak fire. And the only reason we moved from there is there was no more elk there. Don't get me wrong, the elk are coming back, but we was killing real nice bulls down there in a different way of hunting. We hunted out of blinds down there. We did a lot of things. As soon as I got to the JB, Tony will tell you that I brought blinds with me. I brought feeders with me. I brought stuff with me. And within a week of seeing how Tony was hunting that place, I said, Jesus, I won't even set a camera up. I brought 75 cameras with me. I asked the biologist and I asked the game wardens about the cameras, and they said, oh, it's okay just as long as you don't transmit the pictures back to the cell phone. I brought 75 with me because that was the way we hunted down in New Mexico and in Guffey, Colorado. We put cameras out in the area, and when an elk come in, we checked the cameras every day, and I knew what was basically in that area, so we hunted blinds or hunted canyons, or knowing where they were at. Here on the JB, Jesus Christ, he'd see 300 head of elk going out of these pastures, and he'd get on front of them and cut them off and go whacking them cows.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions?
Aren't we on comments?
Comments? Yeah, that's what
I just
I
want to make sure. I want to make sure.
That's my bedtime.
One thing I'll say, I mean, this isn't reflective of this particular issue. You all know I'm pretty conservative when it comes to the CWMU program in general. One thing about that program is it's a very elite group. There's a lot of privileges handed out in that program. A lot of privileges handed out for some amount of return. And I do think that it's important that group to get in, it takes a lot to get in, and it should take a lot to stay. And I think there's a chance for that to happen here. And I guess the question I'd have, and sorry, this comment has a question. Chad, if we deny the renewal today, could next year, could we be looking at a new application for CWMU and be having a different discussion? Just, is it possible? Is all I'm asking.
Yes.
Okay, so today is not the end all be all, I guess is something I want to point out. And for me, a little bit, I appreciate the division taking a cautious approach. And I want to be clear, I think they should take a cautious approach for any of these CWMUs that are applying to get in, or new operators. And so I think it's been talked about tonight. There are other opportunities for this landowner to work with the division over this next year and different types of hunting opportunities, management opportunities, things like that, to show what we've got. And then once the division feels a little more confident, and the other thing I would like to see is that I would like to see this application go through the advisory committee, which it didn't get to. So if we can get it through an advisory committee, we get an opportunity to work together, I think we can be having a different conversation in a year or two. And, you know, there's been a lot of talk about willingness to be on probation. In my mind, not doing the renewal this year and giving a year to work together is that probation. And then come back and let's have a different conversation with some support from the division. And I understand the division had to make a rush choice, and that is unfortunate. But for me, I think I would prefer to see that the division's recommendation be accepted with this understanding that there's other opportunities to work with the division over the next year, and we could be having a different conversation next season. But I'm overly cautious with CWMUs.
Any other comments? Anna?
Sure. I was just going to say, I do think that CWMU program is very valuable for Utah. And so I appreciate Cash, your kind of comment of keeping those high standards and the cooperation is a key part of that. So.
If there's no other comments, we'll open it up to a motion. And we can do it separate if you want to address the JB Ranch totally separate from the rest of it, or if you want to include it all, so.
No, I don't want to make any, I can vote. You'll hear my voice in my vote. So someone else can make a motion.
I make a motion to accept the division's recommendations as presented.
Okay, we have a motion on the table by Sunshine to accept the recommendations from the division as presented. Do we have a second on that?
I'll second.
Seconded by Cash. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion, raise your hand. For Scoot? He's gone. All right. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion fails 5-4.
I'll make a motion to accept everything but the denial of JB's Ranch in the CWMU program.
Okay, we have a motion by Charles. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Steve. Any discussion on the motion?
Just to clarify, your motion would say accept the application.
Yeah, firm. It would be accepting the application and the rest of the stuff on this agenda item.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 4. Motion passes 5-4. Would those who opposed it like to clarify?
I think I've already said.
I guess I just appreciate the CWMU process, and there's the committee. This application didn't have a chance to go through that. So I support following the process.
Yeah, and for me, like I said, I think we should work with this operator. I would have liked to see the probation be that opportunity to, let's take a break for a year, come back. So that's what I was looking for.
Okay.
I echo the same thing. I think there's ways to work with the JB without necessarily passing it into a CWMU right away.
Okay, well, that concludes all of our action items. We appreciate everybody's attendance and the comments. We'll now entertain a motion to dismiss.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Thanks, everybody.